Hi, welcome to video. My name is Amber, and before we actually start, I'd like to talk about a couple of things in a small amount of detail. So the first thing I'd like to mention is that a lot of what I talk about in this video is largely based on personal experience with this game, so not everything I say will apply to everyone who watches this video. And while I won't be going into specific details about things that have happened to me in my life, there will be a level of me going into heavy themes of events that have happened, so just be prepared for that. Thing number 2 is that after this video was written and recorded, a new update to Slay the Princess dropped called the Pristine cut. This is an update that added quite a bit of new content to this game, content that I won't actually be talking about in the video very much just because it wasn't really available to me. Now, I was fully aware that this video wouldn't come out until after the update dropped, but because of the context of why I even wanted to make this video in the first place, I felt like adding on more to the video just to talk about the brand new content didn't really feel right. Oh my god. So if you're worried about spoilers for the update, I'm really not going to be talking about it. And lastly, Slay the Princess is a horror game with a lot of dark themes. As a result of this, some parts of the game can be a bit uncomfortable to see. The creators of this game have made a long list of content warnings on their website, just detailing the things you might encounter in your time playing. But in my case, at the start of each chapter, I've put a small screen just to warn you about things that may make you uncomfortable within that chapter. So when a new chapter is beginning, make sure to look away from your drawing tablet. But just in general, for the video, there's going to be a lot of blood and gore, the worst of it censored, horror themes, death, and talks of depression. That's all from me, and now over to me from 2 weeks ago. The world around us is a place that we'll never truly understand. We can't predict our futures because there are too many factors standing in our way that we can never account for. We can't be certain of what emotions we'll feel from moment to moment. We can't be certain of what words will be said to us by other people. We can't know who will still be in our lives tomorrow. We can't always predict a downward spiral, and we can't predict when we'll escape one if we're caught inside it. But at the same time, we can't predict the small act of kindness that will help us get through the darkness. We can't predict when it will feel like our effort is being recognized. And we can't predict when an experience will change us for the better. In my case, those last few points are especially important. It was March of this year when I found out about Slay the Princess, a game by Black Tabby Games released in October of 2023. At the time, I didn't know much about the game other than what little I could glean from the Steam page. It's a horror visual novel based around the idea of having to slay a princess in order to save the world. Just this idea alone caught my eye, a contrast to saving a princess as we'd be used to seeing in fairy tales and Nintendo games. Even just from a cursory glance, the game looks stunning, scenes presented in black and white, all hand-drawn with pencil and paper. It was hard to not be impressed from even as little as that. The game only has 2 voice actors, Jonathan Sims and Nicole Goodnight, who possess amazing talent as we'll see throughout, there being many variations on the voices they use throughout our journey. But like I said, I didn't know much about this as I was first going into the game. It seemed very cool from the little I knew about it, and I've been a fan of visual novels in the past, so I figured it was worth a shot. At the time I was even thinking, if this game is as good as it sounds, then it might be worth making a video about. I had toyed with the idea of making videos about other visual novels in the future, so I figured that at minimum, Slay the Princess could be good practice for me to get used to making a video about that style of game. But as you could probably guess, what I experienced was much more impactful than I expected, blowing my already high expectations completely out of the water. It only took me 30 minutes to completely fall head over heels for this game. It went from a game that I felt like I could really like, to one that I love with every fibre of my being. A game that I can call the best game that I've ever played. One that has fundamentally changed me in a way that I truly needed. Hell, I'm wearing merch of the game right now as opposed to my usual leather jacket getup because that just feels right. This isn't just a game that I love. This is a game that has helped me to escape the darkest period in my life. I can honestly say that this game saved me, and that doesn't feel like an exaggeration. But how? What did it do? To explain, I'll need to go over the game in detail. I won't be explaining every single thing that this game has to offer, but I will be spoiling a large part of it in enough detail for me to feel that I can explain what this game has done to help me. If you haven't played this game before, I urge you to try it for yourself. It's a very worthwhile experience, even when you know everything that I'll be discussing here. Without further ado, let's get into the game.
You're on a path in the woods. And at the end of that path is a cabin. And in the basement of that cabin is a princess.
The game wastes no time in setting the scene, this narrator giving us a quick insight into the situation we find ourselves in. When we push him for details, he seems to push back, urging us to move forward and slay the princess without properly questioning why, insisting that she will end the world, and that we have to stop her. Eventually, he does promise us a reward, without telling us what it is. I have mixed feelings about this man. Moving forward, we spot the cabin, and here...
We're not going to go through with this, right?
The voice of the hero, someone who is not meant to be us, rather just a voice that can interact with both us and the narrator. The three of us move into the cabin, made up of a quiet and plain room, only furnished by a single table with a pristine blade perched atop. How convenient. Since we're here to slay the princess, we take the blade with us before advancing, climbing down the dark staircase towards a decrepit basement that clearly hasn't stood the test of time well.
Her voice carries up the stairs.
Who's there?
From her first words, it's clear that she already has a problem with us, like she can already tell we're a threat. Making it down there, she seems...
And there you are. Are you here to kill me or something?
a little nonchalant, but unperturbed. Clearly she's capable of something, but if we go in with full force, we'll easily be able to stab her, taking her out, though she seems to disagree.
Do you actually believe this was enough to kill me?
But what can she really do? She's dead, we put an end to her, and we can head back upstairs. Returning to the cabin, something feels amiss. The illuminated night sky coming through the windows is different, and exiting through the door, we see nothing. The exact absence of anything, known or unknown. We're told that everything is fine and that this is meant to be our reward, but it really doesn't feel like it. How can a reward be pure emptiness? The narrator makes it clear that we're safe and happy. We're happy, right? He seems to think so, and we've already agreed with him, so he must be right. This is our happy ending. Everything passes, leaving ourselves only in the state of bliss, happy existence, forever. Yes, that was the good ending, as made obvious by the crayon. I mean, it makes sense. We slayed the princess. That's all we were meant to do. Why do anything else? If it wasn't entirely obvious by this point, I don't see this as a good outcome at all. There's no world to go back to. Nothing even around other than the cabin we were brought to in the first place. And we're made to wait out eternity, constantly feeling this faux state of happiness. I want to briefly dive into this because this is something in the game that, as silly as it sounds, does completely terrify me. You have no agency in this outcome. We listen to this person who, from the moment the game begins, is telling us what to do, promising that the world will end if the princess isn't slain. But once we do slay her, our world essentially ends anyway. We're left amongst the essence of nothingness, forced to just wait out eternity. That's haunting, genuinely. We're a victim to the endlessness of time, having to believe that we're happy to deal with being surrounded by nothing. Literally nothing. We, as people who are able to perceive things, will never truly understand what pure nothingness is. When we close our eyes, we might be able to see some semblance of light, or some imagined visual stimulus. You'll typically be able to hear something, whether it be a creaky floorboard, the ticking of a clock, or the wind blowing past you. Even the subtle feelings we tend to filter out, a slight warmth or chill in the air, none of that. Nothing. I struggle to think of something more petrifying than this. Now, obviously there's a little more to this game than just this ending, so let's go back, just a little bit. Let's disagree. This isn't a reward, we're not happy, this is not my beautiful house, this is not my beautiful wife. And then the hero gets an idea. This place needs to end. It's oppressive, a truly endless nothing. And we've already saved the world, right? Nothing can change here, so we can escape. The narrator calls us an ingrate for not appreciating his reward, but that doesn't matter. We can take the blade back from the now decomposed princess, however that works, and end this. Of course, that's not exactly true. Welcome to Chapter 2.
You're on a path in the woods, and at the end of that path is a cabin.
We've returned. Everything has been taken back to its base state. The woods, our position, the narrator, it's all as if none of that was real. Expressing confusion, unfortunately, leads nowhere. The narrator seems to genuinely not believe that we could have seen all this before. The hero makes a fair point here.
If he doesn't remember what happened, then maybe it's best to keep it that way. That's fine. It wasn't very hard to kill her last time.
Oh god, that's a new guy. Essentially, through the experience of all of that, a new voice has entered our mind space, able to interact with us like the others. And this one is cold. The narrator reinforces that we should be listening to him, and implies that our actions had consequences. He makes a fair point, since we're alive again, but what sort of consequences could we even face when the world resets, other than the new guy? Continuing the talk gives us some slight lore droplets, including the fact that apparently no one else can do this, so the pressure is on. As we make our way back into the cabin, it's immediately obvious that the decor has changed. The main room looking old and frayed compared to its previous slight coziness. Our blade is still perched upon the table, but there's also a mirror. Not just a mirror, but a mirror that the narrator refuses to acknowledge. We can ask, but he'll act like it isn't there. Mysterious. He's insistent, but we can fucking see it. If we walk up and reach towards it, it's gone. Another entry into the endlessly growing list of wild phenomena that can't be explained, yet. It's in our best interest to take the blade with us again, because it's much better that we have it as compared to any potential intruders. Going downstairs, we're met with an environment that simply screams decayed. The princess staying silent on account of her, well, being dead. There she is, her remains still remaining. Though this barely lasts a second before the spectral form emerges from the battered floorboards, greeting us with a cheeky smile, before settling in the air above the corpse. It's her. She somehow came back as a
ghost! Oh. Wow.
So, on the bright side, she did die. Her voice is calm, yet chilling, and she cheekily calls us killer, before showing us just how much she can still affect us, sending chills down our spine. We can grill both the narrator and the spectre, looking for answers. At this point, there's the question of how she managed to change like this, but also the question of why we didn't. Death clearly works strangely in whatever this place is. And with every word, the spectre distorts our perspective further, bending away the idea of death being the way that we know it to be. She continues on, telling us that there's an emptiness within her, a longing to go home, despite not knowing where home truly is, just knowing that it must be somewhere else. Obviously, the narrator nips this in the bud, reminding us that the world will end if we don't kill her, but counterpoint, I don't like him. She pleads with us that she truly desires freedom, and at this point, it feels like the only way for her to escape is through us.
So, let me hitch a ride. After all, you owe me.
Oh right, this is a horror game. So her best means of escape is to possess us. You know, like a ghost does, and be brought outside of the cabin. The right choice isn't obvious here. We don't really know how ghosts work. They're mysterious, they're dead. Is possession really going to be as simple and painless as it might seem? She will literally be inside of our mind, and there's no guarantee that she can or even will get back out. This whole plan is really a big question mark, but are we even going to consider killing her again? You can't kill the ethereal, the incorporeal, and considering how much power it seems like she has right now, what would angering her do other than make the situation worse? Of course, eventually we'll run out of useful questions, leaving only the options of helping her or fighting back. Fighting back has gone poorly in the past, so let's let her in. She immediately accepts, gleefully rushing into our form, our perceptions briefly changing to account for her presence, her influence weighing heavily on our entire being, forcing us down to the ground, before urging us to keep moving.
I know everything feels heavy right now, but we still have to get out of here.
Looking at the essence of our soul, she refers to us as shards of broken glass, seemingly referring to the two voices speaking inside of us, but she says that the narrator is different.
You're barely even there, like the shape of something left behind. You're more of a memory than a person.
That's rude.
A memory of a sort. This guy's existence raises more questions as time goes on, but the princess keeps us focused, encouraging us to make our way out, however slow it is. She's intent on going home, though the narrator stays certain that she'll end the world if she gets outside. The narrator tries his best to stop us, by telling us that we're exhausted, We didn't believe that we were happy earlier, so this is a bad plan. We make it to the door, and...
As you exhale from the effort, you look up and see... yes?
Nothing. He's gone, and so is everything else.
So we did slay him after all. He had it coming, I suppose.
Okay, I've heard enough from these two. Let's see if I can pop out.
You feel a lightness in your chest as a pair of sunken eyes emerge from your body and stare up at you.
Anna, you actually freed me, didn't you? I'm outside. Thanks for giving me a second chance, killer.
Don't mention it.
I think this is where I'm meant to be.
Oh, okay. So, the word of the day is what? Because what? Not only did the world seem to fade into nothingness, but this time the narrator vanished. And after the princess escaped from our bodies, feeling at home, she was abducted by arms. There's no better way to describe that. We're just left with ourselves in this void. But in the princess's stead, we're met with a familiar sight. We approach the mirror despite the apprehension it should bring, reaching out to it for real this time, and being met with... it's you. Despite the fact that nothing is making sense, and we're suddenly trapped in this realm of nothingness, we know that answers will come, but more importantly, we can return to the cabin? Of course, we don't find the cabin here, instead we find her.
Something finds me in the long quiet.
Well, not quite her. This being refers to the Spectre as a fragile vessel, implying that she's some other force speaking through her somehow. A force that speaks in quasi-riddles. She speaks about the vessel, and seems to have a very vague understanding of what this place actually is. She's only just now come to be, but she doesn't want to be here. There are, however, two things she says that have a pretty strong impact on me. The first is simply, I think that you are like me. How can we be like her? She's some inhuman force. Presumably what took the Spectre into this world. The one holding her still as we speak. The one whose physical form, if that truly is hers, is not cohesive. What stands out to me more is, how can the world have ended if we are talking? It is truly a good question. This can't truly be the end of the world. But the world we knew is gone. The narrator is gone. What can this be if not the absence of the world? Eventually, we will exhaust all of our talking points with her explaining that there are worlds beyond us that we're meant to reach, and that if we believe her to be able to make us forget, we might be able to reach them. Cryptic, yes, but she's the only one around. It would do us well to trust her. She urges us to bring her more perspectives, or vessels, though she mentions that we won't need to find them all, just some. We can deny her the opportunity to make us forget, but that leads nowhere, only closing the game and leading us back to her when we reopen it. There's a correct answer here, and it's to go back and forget.
She asks that I tell you to remember her. You won't.
While there is much to ponder about what we just witnessed, answers will come in due time, so it's best to just move forward. Forgetting sends us back to the original path, as it was in Chapter 1, to continue our journey. We head up to the cabin for the first time, grabbing the knife and heading into the dusky basement once again to face the princess. The hero doesn't recognize her, she doesn't recognize us, and the cold just isn't here at all. Instead of just coldly killing her frame 1, this time there's more reason to hesitate. What happens down here clearly has some effect on the future, so each move needs to be planned carefully. Of course, there's still reason to slay her, we did bring the blade with us after all. So she's on high alert. As we rush to slay her this time, since we hesitated slightly, she has room to fight back. The two of you trading blows back and forth until eventually we can manage to deal the final hit, though it's too late for us. She's done a lot of damage and death is inevitable. Really the best option was to take her with us. In her final moments, she has the same smugness she had before, as if she knows this isn't the end. Because, once again, it isn't.
You're on a path in the woods.
We're back in the woods, and we can do the same song and dance with the narrator as last time. There isn't much reason for you and I to be curious. We've seen this before, we knew this could happen. It's just happening again. This time, instead of being joined by the cold, we're met by the stubborn, a gruff voice that's intent on defeating the princess, specifically in a fight. Entering the cabin presents us with a very different sight. Walls of pure stone cruelly leading us to the entryway, the blade sitting on an iron altar, and the mirror once again being ignored by the narrator. Now at this point, let's consider our options. The last time we re-met the princess, she was a ghost because we killed her. This time we fought her, which you should remember. Can you think of any reason for us to go in unarmed?
You take the blade from the altar.
I thought so. The mirror vanishes as we descend into the basement, met with the harsh cave-like feel that this version of the cabin brings. And the princess, who sounds...
Is that another challenger? Finally.
fierce. Meeting her face to face just reinforces that. She's tall, she's got a dragon's tail, she has hooves and horns, like you see people depict the devil with. She looks buff, and worst of all, she looks pissed. She wastes no time in savoring the fact that we can fight. Oh god, she's gonna kill us again. We can take a moment here to see that we've convinced the narrator that this is our second time here, because he still didn't fully believe us in the woods. But the mask slips a bit. He expresses with frustration that he doesn't remember the last time, and then...
Not all of us have the luxury of jumping over to a parallel universe the second we die.
So, I mean that's an explanation for why we keep coming back to the woods, but he said that basically unprompted. He knows. He knows much more than he's letting on. Anyway, we can have our usual small talk with the adversary. She's begging for a fight, to the point where she doesn't even want to leave. She wants to fight. She wants to fight you. A lot. Over and over. Now, we could argue with her, but do you want to argue with the extremely tall and strong woman standing before us? Attempting to fight sounds like the best option. Rushing towards her, she's ready to tussle, and responds to our slash with a debilitating punch. But she immediately stops because she wants more. She wants a true fight. She wants us to crave the thought of seeing her die by our own hands. This is weirdly encouraging, honestly, despite it being a fight to the death. So let's give her what she wants. Trying something else clearly isn't gonna go well. Attacking her again brings out a glee in both her and the stubborn. Oh god, they're perfect for each other. She's standing there, even acting like she'll come back to life immediately if we kill her again, leaving her guard down. Taking the shot, she looks as smug as ever, as she collapses against the wall, bleeding out. It's over, but the stubborn wants to believe otherwise. Grow up. The stubborn, being stubborn, tries to convince us that she can come back, to the chagrin of the narrator. It's a match made in hell.
Can the two of you stop arguing? No! I'm not the only one who just saw her eyes open, right?
Unfortunately, the stubborn was right. She's alive, and she wants more. She needs more. The hero expresses that this is pointless because it seems like she could just come back to life again, and this panics the narrator. He says that we're close to untethering by thinking about this, which is fucking unnerving. He's being cryptic, but there's really only one conclusion to what he could be leading towards. The princess can't die. Apparently the simple thought is too much for the world. This is big and bad. She's ready to fight, and she immediately kills us.
That blow was apparently lethal. How anticlimactic.
But the stubborn disagrees. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If she can't die, we can't die. What follows is a clear flurry of lethal blows, both of you destroying the other in more and more violent ways, again and again and again, as things begin to fade. Once again, she's with us in the void, and she's taken away. We meet with the mirror, approaching to see ourselves again. We've grown. Back in the long quiet, we can meet her once more. Clearly bringing her these vessels is helping her, whoever she is. She's learning, growing, building up. She doesn't quite seem to know where this is leading, but it feels like where it will end up is what we should want. Out of everyone we've met, she's shown us the most actual kindness.
Why wouldn't I be kind to you? You are the only thing I know that isn't me.
Let me also add, because it's been a while since I focused on the game outside of its story beats, that these scenes, where we're talking to this force through the vessel, they're truly some of the most beautiful parts of this game. The writing here is impeccable, because despite the flowery and unclear nature of her words, when you fully understand this game, what she's saying does make sense. The most unclear things turn coherent. And of course, the art here adds to this beauty to an extreme extent. There's this ethereal quality to seeing the vessels held up by these disembodied hands, seeing them ebb and flow behind her, and taking a moment to appreciate how fucking confident Abby Howard must be when drawing hands, the bane of most artists. We once again say goodbye to her, returning back to the woods.
We will meet again.
We have more vessels to bring to her. And here we are once more. Woods, cabin, stairs. Let's tell her we're gonna kill her, it'll be funny.
Oh, are you now? Why don't you come down and let me take a look at you?
I was right. After the usual spiel, we can talk to her, just a little, before trying to slay her. Like last time, she knocks us down, and we fight for a while. But instead of finishing the job, like last time, because the option's actually grayed out, we can choose to flee, locking her in the basement by herself, where she'll hopefully bleed out. She manages to free herself from her shackles, but luckily we can make it upstairs in time, blocking the door and blocking it with the table. Now all we have to do is wait. Wait until she passes, which she'll surely do eventually. For now though, her voice is haunting.
It's not like this little door will hold for very long anyways.
She's trying to fight her way through, but eventually, despite how loud her fighting is, we fall asleep. And... uh-oh.
Thanks for helping me get out of that awful basement.
Oh no. Like a sleep paralysis demon, she appears from the darkness, working her way towards us. Her presence is enough for our body to be shutting down. She's too overwhelming, too much to handle, and without her even needing to fight us any further,
Everything goes dark, and you die.
Now, here's a thought. The door. We locked the door, and we blocked it with a table. Do you see the problem with this picture? Blocking a door only works if the door actually opens in the direction you're blocking. This table was pointless. And now, instead of living the dream, we were led into... Now, to briefly elaborate on something I mentioned earlier, when we expressed that the princess couldn't die, the narrator took this as a step too far. In fact, the princess only came back after the stubborn spent so long saying she would. The idea of our choices mattering is not a novel concept in the world of visual novels, but here we're seeing the idea that the princess is affected by how we see her. We saw her as a corpse, and she came back as a spectre. We saw her as a fighter, and she came back with a desire to fight us over and over again. We said she couldn't die, and she proved us right. The ways in which we view the princess are affecting her state of being. Of course, this is all leading to something, because we just saw her as someone worth fleeing from. A haunting figure. In other words, we're screwed right now. Experiencing deja vu for the third time, we're met by the paranoid, a voice that's in a perpetual state of worry. We head up to the cabin and... Welcome back to the terrifying nature of the unknown calling to us. The cabin is largely the same as it was last time, even the table still being knocked over, but obviously the door is like that, and apparitions that resemble the princess are staring right at us. Centering ourselves, we grab our blade and head down into a realm that feels impossible, each step suspended over nothingness, blinking eyes staring at us from the void, the princess's haunting voice ringing out again.
I didn't think you'd come back. We're gonna have a lot of fun, you and I.
Of course, when we fully descend, things aren't much better, the floor having the same air of nihility that everything else does, our paths marked by a surreal fence of sorts. Despite our fears, we have to search for her, and like the princess tells us, no matter where we go, she will find us. And...
There you are. I told you I was going to find you.
oh god. To call her haunting now would be a significant understatement. She's sinister, uncanny, supernatural, gleefully taunting us, knowing that retaliation isn't a clear path for us, as a result of her impact.
What are you doing? I'm working. Do you want this body to function, or do you want... And then experience stops once more, as your body reapproaches death.
Heart, lungs, liver, Nerves. Those 4 eerie words are the only thing keeping us stable in this moment, constantly nagging at us. A reminder that just being around her has us on the brink of death, and she's living for it. Once again, she references the fact that she can't escape the cabin without us, though that desire comes off as much less innocent now. Her monologuing about how she'll gladly spread fear throughout the world. And while she makes an interesting point about how the presence of fear makes the good times shine more, she's still terrifying. While our instincts may drift toward trying to stop her, we are not in a power position here, especially since she can easily trap us down here, and seeing as how we've been trapped before, listening to what she wants is really all we have the power to do. Things don't get easier on the way up. The nightmare following just behind us, only not pushing the limits of what we can take because she needs us alive to make her way out. As we reach the top, the door has locked behind us. Wait, what?
Oh, you snake. There wasn't even a door when we first got here.
I hate this guy. His level of control over reality is getting in the way. The nightmare insists that it will open, and we open the door towards us.
This isn't right. That's not even the way it's supposed to swing. It's supposed to swing out.
And this was a holy shit moment for me, because I looked back and every other time we open the door, it opens into the cabin, not the other way, except when we locked her in the basement earlier. So when I said that blocking the door to the basement was a bad plan, it was a good plan, only foiled by the fact that she is not bound by reality. This realization really enhanced the atmosphere that was built up in this chapter for me. Opening the front door, we hear the narrator fade away again, the nightmare briefly savouring the world, but as it fades, things start to feel cold, and she's taken away from us. We're met again with the mirror, and approaching it reveals... you've withered. Returning to the long quiet, we meet her once again. She's growing more powerful with each vessel, yet she's still a mystery. She gives us some insight into the nightmare, which I honestly think is beautiful.
A doll, abandoned to the company of her darkest impulses. She desires only companionship, but the only thing she knows is how to hurt.
It's a perspective that's drastically different to the one we forged for ourselves. After all, we were a victim to the hurt she brought, and it can be hard to see the one inflicting it as a victim of themselves. She assures us that any vessels we bring her are truly a gift, but she also tells us that she tries to see us as equals. Us equal to her? We still don't really know what she is, but eventually we'll learn. For now though, we say goodbye, to return to the woods once more.
I will be here when it is time for us to meet again.
We go through our usual song and dance, but once we reach the basement, let's drop the knife. Maybe we can get somewhere by just talking to her for once. She stares at us coldly, uncaring towards our mission, and making the great point that we truly don't understand why we're meant to do this. If we don't kill her, she'll destroy the world. That part is known, but that's not really what we've experienced. We can choose to trust her, and considering how killing her blindly is gone, maybe putting trust in her is a good option. Now that she knows our intentions, it only makes sense to ascend back up the stairs, to find the key to her shackles, but instead we find that the door is locked. Locked by who? Well, it feels like it was the narrator. He's tried this trick already, but we've beaten this trick already. All we need is the princess. She directs us towards cutting her out of the shackles, her right hand being ripped from the rest of her body, which she is nonchalant about, ready to accompany you to the locked door. But then the narrator takes over, putting his words into action, our actions. Against our will, he forces us to get ready to strike, but we get given the chance to warn her, though it's hidden away. The narrator can only impose so much control. She moves out of the way, seeing our struggle, seeing an internal conflict that she can't fully comprehend, but she helps us the only way she really can.
Maybe I'll see you in another life.
As we fade away, we have to wonder what this could even do to her. The entire time, she seemed calm, completely unaffected by every speck of turmoil that floated her way. What could she possibly become after this? Once more, we return to the path with a new voice, the skeptic. We're right to be skeptical. The narrator is up to something, and it's becoming more and more clear that we shouldn't be blindly trusting him. He's happy to change reality just to have his way. Approaching the cabin,
Just go in, take the knife, and do what you're supposed to. Wink. Did you just say wink out loud? No, I didn't. Wink.
We enter to the sight of oppressive stone walls, as if we're walking into an old prison, and I guess in a way we are. The princess is locked down here, been there for who knows how long, and what are we gonna do? Are we really going to slay her? That's what he wants. And I'm sick of him. He continues to ignore the mirror, and though you may be tempted to enter without the knife, the skeptic insists that we take it. He can't trust the situation, so the blade is necessary for safety. Climbing down the dank stairway to meet with her once again, she's even more chained up than before, 2 shackles on her wrists, and 1 around her neck. She's not getting out of here at all. Our attention is also brought to the empty shackle to the right, completely empty and open, pointless to use on her. It's been there before as well, but it stands out more here. Since there's reason to assume that it must be used somehow, we step towards her purely just to sit down, but she stops us. And honestly, that's fair. We have a blade, and we still don't know exactly what we're doing. You both can discuss the situation, her saying that her best means of escape is for us to cut her out. And she's saying this with a shackle around her neck? The princess's recollection of last time leads to the narrator letting things slip again, explaining that even though he can't remember last time, he believes that it happened, and he's not happy about it. Getting a second shot is a possibility, but one he wanted to avoid, wanting to believe that you wouldn't be dealing with what is clearly a more tough situation. He goes over the idea of us having incomplete knowledge of everything again, and how that's to our benefit. If the princess bends based on what we know about her, then if we know what is so bad about her, things could get a lot worse really quickly. But that's assuming that things are as bad as he claims. But now, what are we to do? She assures us that the best move is to hand her the knife. She might be bluffing, but she spoke in the cabin about trust, so let's continue to trust her and do what she wants. We slide her the blade, and she picks it up to bring it to her neck. Oh god. You can just see that she is, indeed, starting to slice her neck, and we're given the option to look, or shut our eyes. Despite how disturbing the sight of her severing her own head is, the reality of not watching is somehow worse. The narrator describing the sounds in heavy detail, making sure that we don't miss a thing, the strong sounds of viscera overwhelming us. With a final thud, we open our eyes, met with her corpse, head resting on the ground. She's dead. I guess we didn't have to do anything at all. The skeptic suggests taking her head with us as sort of a trophy, and while we can say no, we may as well. We wouldn't want her to somehow put herself back together easily. Holding her in our hand, we ascend back up to the main room, to be met with...
Wait, no, that's not right.
Well played.
This is the end of the world, isn't it?
She managed to live, escaping the cabin in a sense, even if it was just as a head. This is enough to collapse the world, as we're used to, and as she remarks on how cold it is, she's taken again. However, we have unfinished business. We can go back a bit and really question the empty shackle. It's calling to us. We walk up and strangely it reacts by entrapping us, supernaturally leaping up to our neck. We're now just as stuck as she is. Our knife propelled to the other side of the room. Our chance of escape and her chance of escape gone. All we can do now is sit and wait, thanks to this mysterious loose chain. We can try to talk to her, but she's not much for small talk. All we do is wait, hoping for any sort of change, but time simply passes. But why is nothing changing? The world itself can't just be static. That's not how anything truly works. The skeptic questions this, and as if on cue, things start to weather, bricks crumbling, erosion taking place, but you're both still alive. Roots don't just sprout through suddenly. Rooms like this don't collapse without a reason. Time is passing on, and we're still the same. We're stuck in this state while the world shifts, until eventually, the walls fall away, the narrator fades out, and the prisoner exclaims that, in a way, we're out of the cabin, before being taken again. We're met with the mirror, and... you've unraveled. Back in the long quiet, we can meet her for a 4th time, holding the shackled vessel.
There's a world beyond the endless walls of the long quiet. We're supposed to be there.
She's starting to reach a level of cohesion, talking of a world outside this space, a world that must contain people who are not like the two of you. She ponders the concept of nothing, like I have earlier in this very video, before describing the prisoner as someone cold and cynical, someone who needed protection. And I guess in a sense, we did protect her. From the narrator. Finally, when we ask how many more vessels she needs, she has a clear answer.
1. Whatever you bring me next will be enough, and then gravity will pull the others back to me.
So whatever we experience next will be our end, and whatever we haven't discovered will be brought to her. Things are getting serious, but at least we know that answers will come in due time.
The next time I see you, each of us will finally know what we are. I will be here, waiting for you.
While I could skip ahead to the basement once again, there's something different. Not in the path up, but in us. After going through the song and dance of this chapter 4 times, I realized something. When we walk into the cabin, the blade is perched on the table, but we don't have to take it. I just automatically took it until this point, when something just clicked in my mind. The only person who encouraged us to take it was the narrator, so let's disobey. Walking down the familiar staircase, we hear her call out to us, and...
Hello? Is someone there?
she's different. This is a different voice than we heard the last few times. She's scared, uncomfortable, pleading for help. Even the simple choice of choosing to take the knife with us was enough to change her. Meeting her, she seems worried, just wanting our help, though we can talk to her first. Approaching, she has a much more friendly look to her, though she is scared, barely knowing herself. If we examine the chains, we can try to head upstairs to look for a key, but once again, the door locks behind us. This goddamn narrator. Forced to accept the reality of being trapped, the princess turns slightly feral, gnawing at her arm to try and escape herself. With that slight moment of uncomfort, the blade suddenly appears, as if the narrator is trying to say, "Now do you see what I was talking about? Do it." I still won't though. We use the blade to cut her free, ready to get her help in breaking the door open. But like before, the narrator attempts to take over us, but we resist. This time, she's scared rather than cold. She notices the conflict in our eyes, and in what feels like desperation, approaches us, taking the blade and using it. She knows you want to help her, but can't. So, strangely, this gruesome killing comes off as sympathetic, especially considering how distraught she seems after. It genuinely feels like she's trying to be a good person in her actions, and we haven't seen anything like that before. Where could this even go? Back in the woods, joined by
If we're going to save our beloved, we'll have to be sneaky about it.
the smitten. He speaks with bravado, proclaiming that he and the princess are in love, in direct opposition to the narrator. Oh god, he's Zap Brannigan. Into the cabin, and we see a quite familiar sight. It still appears as a prison, but a more luxurious one than we saw with the prisoner. I don't think it's hard to immediately see the parallels and contrasts of these two routes. The essential story beats in the first chapter are quite similar, just with the princess having a much different personality. Though we can take the blade, we likely shouldn't. We've gotten her to be an amicable person through ignoring it, and will we really want to ruin her hard work? The staircase down is more royal, and as for the princess,
Hello? Is someone there?
she still seems calm, almost happy. And not a happiness born from a desire to hurt or catharsis. What we're hearing is joy. We meet her in the basement, where she looks stunning, like the princesses we'd imagine in fairy tales. A damsel in distress, and wear the knight in shining armor. She even calls us her dashing hero. It's like a dream come true. The smitten seems empowered, but the narrator, once again seeing that we've been here before, is frustrated, especially since now, why would we even want to kill her? He can try to convince us, but we don't have the blade. What really stands out during this back and forth is how the damsel responds quickly, just wanting what we want, showing little substance in her words, while the smitten exposits much more than she does. There's something strange about her beyond the usual. She's like a love interest with little characterization of her own. But that's still better than a nightmarish monster, so let's help her. She's innocent now and worth saving. Eventually, we'll exhaust our options and go up to save her, the smitten threatening to...
And if you try anything that might harm our dearest, I will end our life without a second thought.
Okay, Jesus Christ, threatening to die if the narrator intervenes again. There are 3 people in our head, and 2 of them are the worst. Thankfully, we can end this by gently sliding the shackle away from the princess's arm. Yeah, she wasn't even trapped, I know. And letting her go, a gesture she greatly appreciates, jumping up to hug us in glee. With that, the 2 of you can leave, her filled with joy as you hold hands, escaping for a life. Together? Who can say? The narrator tries the fucking door thing again, but it barely takes a moment for us to open it. Love is stronger than anything the narrator can throw at us, apparently. Escaping to the world, things start to fade. This happy ending barely lasts a moment. A love being taken away, it's over. Except, is it over? You could see it too, right? In her empty responses and desires to just give us what we want. There has to be more to her. If we go back, we can ask her what she wants to do.
I don't actually know. Nobody's ever asked me what I wanted before.
How can she not know? We can push her on this, hoping for an answer, but things start to break.
I just want to make you happy.
She changed. This feels wrong. Pushing her again and again abstracts her from her reality even further, detail fading from her being until she's barely a sketch, and the basement is gone. She gets taken from us and we're just left to wonder, what even was that? There's something incredibly eerie about the idea that she was, as a character, completely one note. Flat, unable to deal with not bending to our will. Of course, we can ignore the signs and see what we have as love. But the truth of it is that her existence is paper thin. We return to the mirror and approaching it, we find we're nothing at all. At least, at first. Our gaze refocuses and we can see a vague figure in the shadows. But what is it?
I think you know what I am.
The mirror shatters into pieces, and we're left staring at the shards, reflecting the image of the narrator. It seems that he too knows that we're approaching the end. We're given a long list of questions that we can ask him, but with each question, a shard of the mirror vanishes with a crash. So here's what we can learn from him about who we are, where we are, what our purpose is, and what his is. The narrator isn't a being that is in any way similar to you or I, at least not anymore. He's merely the echo of a being, the one who created us. This echo truly doesn't have any memories of what we experienced in previous chapters. He just knows that these experiences can exist. The being who created us, he's gone. He died long ago because he knew that there was no way for him to achieve his goals while still staying alive. As for the goal, us slaying the princess, he truly does believe that leaving her alive will end the world. And that's because, like with us, he created her too. Both you and the princess, crafted by this mortal, spurred on by the thought of oblivion taking away everything we've ever loved, managing to tear apart the cycle of life and death. But it was a rough tear, one that left you with a part of her, and her with a part of you. Because of how you are made, you both are, in every sense, gods. Gods trapped in a construct, made to fight things out without the knowledge of your true purpose. She is known as the Shifting Mound, transformation embodied, the capacity for change to occur. But most importantly is that she becomes what she is perceived to be. Not only is that why she would always bend to our expectations, but it's why the narrator had to die. His perception of her would change things too much, since he was someone who saw her as capable of destroying the world. As an echo, this perception wouldn't affect her, so he left this echo inside you, trying to make sure you would destroy her. With her gone, things everywhere would be different. A world that is without change, without suffering, without death. A world that no one has to fear leaving. I have strong thoughts about this, but there's more to explain. From the beginning, we had to believe that the princess wasn't what she truly was. Knowing that she was everything that she turned out to be would make everything so much more complicated. A stray thought could have ruined everything, and even though we know this now, we don't work in the same way a normal being does. Because, like I said, we're a god. We are the Long Quiet, the realm in which we approach the Shifting Mound's vessels. Now, he still wants us to kill her, and it might actually be possible. She is a concept, but so are we. A concept must be able to kill a concept. They're far above what we, as people, are. Eventually, the shards will run out, with us getting enough information to move on to our last moments. With one final fragment of the echo left, we say goodbye, and he insists that we know what we have to do. We look upon ourselves with a new level of clarity, moving across the landscape which is, in a sense, us, to finally meet with her, the real her. As we approach the usual spot, things start to rumble, and eventually...
I can finally see you. And you can finally see me.
This is her, the Shifting Mound, endless in appearance, intangibly beautiful, still speaking to us with the same caring energy she had brought us previously. She heard our entire conversation with the narrator, and she tells us to pay it no mind. We're now met with a choice, the most important one. What do we want to do here? We've been trapped in a construct, forced to trade blows, eventually unlocking our full potentials. So the idea of leaving, bringing ourselves back into the world at large, it's possible. On the other hand, we can fulfill the mission, fighting back against her, finishing what we started long ago. We can try to reason with her, but she remains steadfast. A being of transformation, of change, it's no surprise that she was able to embrace her new role with open arms. While we, a being of stability, struggled to reach the same conclusion. If you spend enough time trying to talk through things, she expresses that words do very little to capture the essence of what we are, especially when we go against the ideas of logic itself. So she must fight back in her own way, aiming to convince us of what we need to be, the only way she can.
Your lover drives a stake into your body, and another, and another, and another. Do I miss your heart because I can't stand to see it go?
With each vessel, we're brought back to the reality that they experienced, with them urging for us to consider the shifting mound's view. We can refute their arguments and see what they have to say, or directly address the shifting mound, trying to reason with her, reject her, help her see things a different way. To no avail. But now that we know more than we did, I'd like to look back at these vessels in a slightly different way. What we can see through the damsel is just how much the idea of things changing can depend on us. When something transforms, changes from one state to another in some way, there's not always a purpose, but there's always a reason. Some kind of explanation for why it happened. While we can't always predict how and why things will change, we can always at least know that on some level, there was something influencing it. It also reinforces that just because things change for the better, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've improved. It's possible that they can be a facade. Like they say, all that glitters is not gold. And with this game having a sudden focus on dichotomy, it's not hard to see things the other way around as well. Just because things don't seem to be getting better, doesn't mean that improvement isn't happening.
To question everything is to deny the truth in front of you. By believing in your suffering, you make your suffering real. By believing in your limitations, you placed a shackle on your neck. Without impermanence, the suffering of living things is infinite.
It is genuinely difficult to follow up her line of reasoning here, because, as I will discuss later, the two opposing forces of infinity and impermanence are two that I struggled to deal with. As for her prior points, change can come from expectation, and it frequently will. The idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy is not a new one, but it's one worth staying aware of. When you start to believe that things will go a certain way, even despite your desires, they can start to trend in that direction. And on some level, you are preparing yourself for when that happens. In addition, I want to go back to that shackle on the wall. It was drawn to us because, in a way, we started as one with the princess, trapped with her in the cycle. The world itself was trying to keep us together instead of being apart.
Fear pretends to protect us from loss. To fear death protects from losing a body. To fear ruin protects from losing status. To fear rejection protects from being known. You took fear by the hand and walked with it into the unknown, and through that, you feared nothing.
The nightmare discusses the concept of fear itself. We see fear as a thing that protects us from the ends of life. Fear can only do so much against those things though. On some level, they're all inevitable. Death exists as a product of life. Ruin as a product of improvement, rejection is a product of experience. They all have counterparts, and fear can hold us back from seeing the greater parts of those. So it makes sense to see fear as a drawback, especially since there's nothing to fear in a world where nothing can change. But does a world without fear feel right? When there's bad in the world, there's also good. When we eliminate one, we eliminate the other as well. What we can do is allow both to exist, and try and find a way past those fears, which is a change that keeps the good in the world, and as the shifting mound does say,
To feel is to exist, and to exist is to have meaning.
The sensation of bleeding and sweating and breaking and mending and dying and living comes back in vivid color. Do you remember when we killed each other with such fervent passion that death itself no longer sat on our shoulders?
This one is a bit more difficult to truly look at. The overarching element of the adversary was that death didn't have to be permanent, that things stayed the same in an endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. But we have to remember how we got there, how we got to a point where death was meaningless and meaning lied within our actions. There is a strange sort of beauty in the cycle, in us coming back to life to kill her, and be killed by her endlessly. 2 equals lost in the thrill of one more fight. But the infinity of it isn't what made it beautiful, it was the passion. If it didn't matter what happened, then there'd be no reason for us to fight back in the way we did. The adversary told us that we had to want to kill her for it to matter, and I think she was right. That's the motivation that a world that can change at any moment brings out in us. While the nature of impermanence is not always a driving force in motivation, the knowledge that the things you do have an impact can cause change in the world, within others and within you. That's what makes things special, and that's what turns things into something greater.
A shiver passes through you as unseen fingers dance across your skin. They remember the violence you inflicted on them, and yet they don't return it. You felt the pain you caused another, and you were willing to sacrifice everything you thought was you to set me free.
Once again, invoking the nature of dichotomy, we are human, we make mistakes, we witness mistakes, and while those can sting, tear us apart, and change us in ways we never wanted, the fact is, there's chance for redemption. There's always a way to look at your past and improve yourself to try and make things right. A person who does bad things can become a person who does good things, if they really want to and put in the effort. And to make things clear, I am talking purely about redemption, not necessarily the act of forgiveness. Those are 2 very different things. In a world where nothing can change, you can just claim that people wouldn't be bad. But in the same way, nobody is capable of becoming more than they are, even if it would benefit them. Without this idea of contrast and dichotomy, do we even truly have the better parts of life? I would love to elaborate more on some of the big things I'm talking about right now, but remember, there's still a goddess in front of us. She continues on about the nature of polarity, urging us to accept her words and escape with her. And now we have many options. First of all, let's accept her. Let's accept the nature of this world and work together as one, as we were before, but stronger. Falling into ourselves, we accept our place as a god, as everything that isn't her. We are the one quiet. We are the ground we walked upon. We are existence as we know it. We feel the sensations of being who we truly are for the first time. A finite construct confining our infinite being, pushing against it to free ourselves, but not having quite enough strength to manage it fully.
I love you.
We're stronger together, whole together. It is when we work as one that we can break down our view of reality and see what is truly there, gain freedom, and look upon our world. Both you and the one who opposes you, governing reality as you were always meant to.
It's magnificent.
At least, that's what she wants. What if we still choose to oppose her? We can choose to fight, even if it seems hopeless, and this choice brings back.
You don't have to face her alone.
The hero, the one who's been with us since the beginning. We can deny his help, but he knows the truth, that we can't take down a god when we deny ourselves the power to be one, especially with how she's become. The hero can instead take us into her heart, back to where this all began, back to the fragment of her infinite being that still exists as we met her. With all of his might, the hero takes us inside. Inside the cabin, she still surrounds us entirely, and now we're met with a familiar choice. Do we take the blade with us? Let's be honest, we've taken this blade so many times. It just feels right to take it again now. Heading down, it's exactly like the first time we met her.
We both know why you're here. You don't have to draw it out for my sake.
Her voice sharp and commanding, though this time she knows who we are, and who she is. We can, of course, go ahead and stab her, which, of course, kills her. Not just her, all of her. Taking down this one fragment, the one in her heart, tears apart her whole being. But like the yin and the yang, in destroying her, you also destroyed a part of yourself. But in the same way, it means that within you, there is a small part of her. In as true of a way as possible, she is gone. Ascending back up the steps, leaving behind what we once knew. We're surrounded by ourselves. The long quiet, alone, and ready to bring about a world free from death, completing the narrator's final goal. Our body, our divine body, unfurls, at full power without her opposing us within the construct. We break it apart with ease, letting out tension and bringing forth the new reality, the perfect one. Our previous extra voices speak up, weighing in on our journey's completion. But there's still more. Returning to the basement, we can choose to talk to her instead of killing her. Here, we can admit that maybe we don't want to be a god. And she concurs, before coming up with a suggestion. It's too late to turn things back. We've already entered her heart, but we don't have have to make a choice specifically. She can do anything we believe her to, which means if we believe her to be able to reset things back to the way they started, before we, the player, even set foot in this world, then she can do exactly that, taking away our knowledge, letting things happen all over again. But maybe next time, they'll be different. Maybe something will change, something that makes this final decision easier. Do we want this? To reset the cycle? We'd forget her, we'd potentially doom the world. But without this option, it's too late to undo everything we've done. And we've done too much for this not to be a reasonable option. Obviously, this being a game of multiple endings, there's no correct answer, but this is such an interesting choice to me. Choosing to get to know her all over again, maybe ending up with a different perspective next time. Letting her do this, she kills us in a way that still feels caring, and we reawaken in the woods.
You're on a path in the woods.
Whenever there's an end, there's a new beginning. But there's one more option. We can choose not to take the knife with us at all, and just talk things out with her. Slaying her, is it truly worth it? Sitting down, this conversation feels much more genuine. We have no ill intent, and despite how she is on the outside, she feels like a friend for the first time. While we can admit that we don't want to be a god again, this time she doesn't seem to mind, making a point about how labels don't need to be what defines us. We define us. We don't need to define ourselves as the gods we were made to be. We can simply be the hero and the princess. What the two of us were brought into was against our will. We never needed to be torn apart and brought into sentience, but that doesn't mean that what we faced wasn't special. Ignoring our godhood and stepping out into the unknown is an option filled with mysteries, but after everything we've gone through, wouldn't it be nice to finally take fate into our own hands? Rejecting to exist as what we were, resisting the narrative that was set forth for us to go through, preventing the endless cycle. In a world where it felt like there were only two choices, we've found four. We take the princess's hands, finding that we feel right alongside each other, being ourselves, together. We ascend from the basement towards the front door. Through the window, we see neither the shifting mound nor the long quiet. Instead, it's the stars in the sky, the gentle glow of a lovely scene, and it feels right. Through uncertainty, these two have found peace, companionship, and maybe even love. As the door opens, we cut to black, leaving their fate as truly a mystery as it is to them. Now, that is the main story of the game complete. We've seen 5 different vessels, seen most of what they had to show, and the overarching narrative that binds these moments all together in a genuinely emotional story. And while there is much more to talk about, which will go a bit quicker now that we have a sturdy base to leap from, there's one more question. One that I feel is worth answering. Why am I even talking about this game? Beyond it being stunning, there's clearly a reason that I'm talking about it in this way. This game is about many things. It's about love, betrayal, mystery, coming together and falling apart. It's about life itself and the nature of the world. But what stood out to me the most is how this game tackles the concept of change. The shifting mound is the embodiment of change in our world, the capacity for things to go from one state to another, and she's our main opposition throughout the game. From the beginning, we're told that we have to kill her to save the world, that knowledge looming over our head the entire time. And when the narrator finally tells us why it is that she has to die, I can honestly say, I understand. Change is scary. The looming threat of death is something that's hard to ignore when it's in your mind. The knowledge that things have to end when you really wish they wouldn't. Things are finite, and that's fucking scary. I'm an autistic person, so change is something that I struggle with. And I fear death. I hate having to deal with the threat of knowing that in any moment everything could be taken away from me, and I have no control over that. Like the narrator, the thought of oblivion taking away everything I've ever known is painful, even petrifying at times. Hell, even from just what we've seen of the vessels, it should be clear that change can be terrifying. So why wouldn't you want to try and prevent change? To get rid of the end of it all. But despite saying that, I can't help but feel that the narrator is misguided, setting forth events for the greater good in his heart, but a world where his goals are achieved is freed from death and life. There's a reason that mortals don't get entrusted with the powers of gods. I mean, with me it's fine, but like, in his case he's doing it wrong, I think. And the reason that all of this stands out to me so much is not just because of who I am, but rather who I was when I first played this game. And it's why I say that this game saved me. In the past, prior to this game's release even, I was in a state of not being happy, though I hadn't completely realized it yet. I thought I was managing to get through the weeks, but looking back, I wasn't. I was in a rut. The weeks passing, things always feeling the same but slowly getting worse even though I didn't notice. I needed something to change for me to get out of it. And change did come, but sadly it was not positive. What I would end up experiencing was loss. loss in a very big and sudden way that I couldn't have prepared for. And although it was a struggle, I did think I was coping, approaching a better state of mind. But as soon as I thought I was getting back to that point, things started to get worse. More things piling down on my psyche, breaking me down, things changing around me without being able to impose any control over it. It felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. The sparkles of optimism that were building up after the initial loss, they were starting to shatter. I tried to keep on fighting, believing that things would eventually just improve, but sometimes the smallest thing can just break you. Something that seemed innocuous, but started to weigh heavily on your mind the more you thought about it. The type of thing that spirals out of control, an intrusive thought that makes you realize just how unhappy you've been. I broke. I completely broke. It felt like I had nothing, like I was nothing. I spent what felt like eons being sedentary, expecting time to heal all wounds, wanting things to improve but having no clear idea on how to make them. Eventually convincing myself that things must be better. Some good things had happened since I broke, but that lasted barely a week. A week that was too much for me to handle, that ended with me breaking all over again. I'm feeling even more broken than before because I had truly convinced myself that things were okay when they weren't. Everything had felt like it changed around me, but I was still the same broken girl that I was before. It's a despairing feeling. You're just stuck there staring at the ceiling with your playlist on repeat and realizing just how much you relate to the lyrics of Fuck the Makeup, Skip the Shower, because there is nothing to improve me. This is not a fucking movie. I am not a superhero. I understand that hearing that might have been a lot. Because trust me, it was a lot to go through, especially since I'm still dealing with the remnants of it. I don't think it's a surprise that the one video that I may ever make that focuses on a topic that I feel negatively about comes from this time. A time where I crave catharsis, and despite believing in the words I said back then, sometimes I still do look back and think, I don't know if that was good for me. My point is, I was dealing with a desire for change and control at the time that this game came into my life. I was still afraid that things could get worse again, and seeing this portrayal of change itself, seeing terror brought out by what she can do, and seeing how the narrator discusses his fears, it resonated with me. So when I realized that I disagreed with the narrator, it was a very strong feeling. It felt like I was seeing hope, gaining back control, looking towards the positive aspects of change, which is something I was never sure if I could do before. I will elaborate more later, but for now I think it's time to look back to the game itself, to the roots that we haven't experienced, and see what we can learn from them about the nature of change, because trust me, there's a lot. Now, while I largely spoke about saving these vessels from the cabin in previous chapters, that's not all we can do. Going down certain paths with them will bring about third chapters. The princesses drifting even further away from how they were when we met them. And some of these segments end up being the most beautiful. If we try and go against the Spectre's wishes, she'll eventually kill us herself, stealing our heart from her chest as revenge. However, we can also find a way to kill the Nightmare, leaving us trapped in her world until we eventually turn the knife back on ourselves in order to escape. Both of these choices lead us to the same place, a place where we meet. The world around us looks haunted, old and dying. When she changes enough, her influence on the construct spreads further than just the cabin. Coming from the Spectre's root, we meet a new voice who feels cheated by her stealing our life right in front of us. The voices try to decipher what's going on, something we now understand fully, so let's move on to the cabin. Entering it, we encounter a dreary hallway, long curtains flowing in, and the mirror blocking our path, though the narrator still insists that it's nothing. The more things change in the world around us, the more this mirror is brought to our mind, like the shifting mound is trying to help us to wake up to our true selves, something that we can't quite do when we still believe ourselves to be mortal in a mortal world. As it vanishes, the princess reveals herself, breaking our bones and bringing us to the floor. We've killed her once, and we've seen her strike fear within us, so now she's a mix of both of those elements, a wraith, intent on forcing her way out of the cabin through whatever means necessary. We don't even have a blade this time, so when faced with this being of horror, there's simply nothing we can really do. She has total control and we're trapped by her will. She gets closer and closer to us, her inhuman form moving in ways it shouldn't. There's no way to stop her from getting what she wants, our body overtaken, and then... In contrast to how she acted when taking over us in the Spectre's route, now she's furious, commanding us to move rather than working with us. We've wronged her too many times to evoke sympathy. She craves escape and has no care towards us left at all. There's no way to stop her. At least it seems that way.
There's another option, you know.
there is a way to solve this problem without freeing the princess or slaying her, in a world where only we are happy. Behind the mirror we saw an empty void, and if we try, we may be able to reach it. The Wraith wills us to move away from the abyss, but we can show our own strength. Two options, both agonizing to undergo. First, let's consider fixing our mistakes. It's a horrible experience, being a puppet to a being who hasn't felt compassion for a single moment, and the narrator only works to prolong this, trying to push the door further and further away in defiance, prolonging our torment until she fights back, bringing us right to the door, the narrator fading as it's too late for him to have an impact.
The candle flicks as we push forward. The air is different here.
We see the same scene we're used to. She escapes from our body before vanishing, like always. We truly suffered in the final moments of that world, the Wraith and the narrator struggling for control with no regard for us. But on the flip side, you can take the reins, forcing yourself to struggle against her for control, barely being able to reach the edge of the cabin and fall into infinity, darkness enveloping us. An endless end is our tomb. But in a way, it feels like we won. We took control. Once again, the narrator leaves, the world fading away in that familiar way, even if there's no world around us. She once again separates and is taken away. I genuinely believe that this isn't the more impactful of the two, because we saw how things could get worse and worse, us falling into torment as a result of both of our actions. And we suffered for it, being taken over as revenge. Things felt truly hopeless, our body being parted towards the end despite the pain. The Wraith didn't have our best interests in mind, and neither did the narrator, trying to set up an endless path of torment in a bid to get control back. But there was a better way. When things look darkest, when the world is against us, the one thing we can hold on to is the fact that we have control, at least over ourselves. We can make our own choices. We don't have to listen to the voices around us holding us down. We can take the plunge and end up with something more profound and better for ourselves. There's a way. There always is, even if it is hard. Back into the realm of the nightmare, we can refuse to help her, but also refuse to kill her, asking her to do her worst. Showing bravery in the face of fear? It sounds like a good option, but she's capable of tearing us apart, and before we know it, she does. Removing her mask and enveloping our mind in darkness, she floods our senses with horror, our mind being broken down by the visions of everything that can be wrong. We see the idea of existing being a detriment to everyone who could ever live, the futility of life, the hopelessness of going through your days when things can spiral out of control in an instant. It's constant, affecting everyone without fail.
Let me out!
The nightmare commands for us to let her out, but we're nothing. We're broken. The body is dead, but we live on. We reawaken in the void, surrounded by suspended trees and still the essence of nihility. We're alive, though only barely. As opposed to just one new voice, we're met with all of them. Every voice we can encounter has appeared, as if we've died and come back over and over and over again, without having any true memory of it. This is a deep level of horror. The idea that we've experienced something far too great for us to remember it. We've been pushed too far. Our brain split into as many different pieces as possible from trauma. A deep and inescapable trauma. We're nothing. We're as close to nothing as we can be. There's nothing left to feel, no reason to try killing her anymore, so freeing her is all we can do. That's what the voices seem to think at this point. We're fractured, and every part of us has given up, lost hope, yet are still at odds with one another. Our only choice is to approach the cabin. We've reached a state where hope is pointless, only going through the motions in order to get through this dark and twisted reality. The blade has been gently plunged into the ground, and our only option is to take it. We're past the point where options matter. Reaching out to it, we see the abyss and our nightmare within, slowly climbing up towards us, gleefully speaking of how she's broken us again and again. She offers us a hand we have to take to let her out. She made us this way, battered and bruised our soul until we were an empty husk just so we could give her the smallest amount of help. She's everything that's wrong in the world, destruction itself, but we can't do anything but help her right now. We're not a being of any sort anymore. We're little more than a tool for her, the slightest stepping stone for her escape. For a moment, things feel nice, her escape in full force, but then things fade as they always do, and she's taken. This section of the script was genuinely difficult to write. We see our hero plunged into the depths of despair, to a level where there truly is no escape, the lowest point that could ever be reached, a point where things are hopeless, a point where she has already won. While the nightmare set forth a creepy and unsettling atmosphere, this one shakes my core in a way that is impossible to handle. It's hard to grasp anything from this because it's a horrifying unreality. That is to say, it's the worst possible scenario in a world far beyond what we could consider the worst case scenario to be. We see a clear look into a world that is free from any speck of hope. This is a world that invokes encouragement only through the knowledge that it is a place I believe cannot truly exist. There is always some kind of hope in the world, even when things do feel hopeless. We can always find someone or something to help us when we truly need it. Going back to the prisoner again, we can take the plunge, rushing to kill her, though she retaliates, trying her best to kill us with her chains. We can fight through the pain, eventually ending her. She tells us that we shouldn't expect her to help us again, and in this world, that is a concern. It's understandable, of course. We clearly tried to resist killing her at first, showing that we had a conscience and wanted to fight back against the narrator's plan, but then we immediately turned on that, slaughtering her when we had no real reason to assume that she was as bad as we were told. As we head back upstairs, we can see that we've been rewarded again. And actually, I'm pissed off now. He said the reward wasn't empty, but it's empty! But this isn't the end. It physically can't be. We're in too deep now. The skeptic interrupts our happy ending, telling us to escape here by whatever means necessary, which of course we do.
Your body lurches as your heart suddenly stops beating.
It's time to meet a Grey. A sort of ghost or spirit, but it's also a great way to describe the landscape we find ourselves on. It's drab, showering down constantly. There's nothing that stands out, it's just grey. The cold joins us again, brought out by the sight of emptiness. The narrator chastises us for dying, because the world can't be saved if we die, which would have been great to actually tell us in advance. We head to the cabin, through the depressing landscape, ready to meet with her again, knowing that she won't be happy to see us. The cabin itself is decaying, moulding, and distorted thanks to this constant downpour. And the overwhelming presence of death within. We can see a silhouette of the princess, watching us briefly before she vanishes. Like with the Wraith, the pristine blade has vanished. Killing her isn't possible without it. Taking the plunge and heading down, the environment is even more decrepit than we remember, and the Grey watches us from below, before vanishing from our side again. Entering the room we've become greatly accustomed to, we see no light coming from above, yet water flowing in from the outside, slowly rising around our feet. The corpse of the princess floats gently in the water, a reminder of what we've done. As we wonder if there's anything left for us to kill, the door above us slams shut, locked by her, standing there ominously, the blade caught in what's left of her chest, aimed at a heart that surely withered away with each betrayal. Once more we have to wonder if she can even be killed in this state. Every time we've rid the world of her, it's been through stabbing her in the heart. The spectre, the adversary, and even the shifting mound. The heart is her weak point, but now she doesn't have a weak point. More importantly, she's trapped us in the basement, and all we can do is try and reason with her. She offers us no sympathy, only desiring to punish us. As we try to speak to her, the water starts to rise, a way for her to get her revenge. She's numb, knowing that she can't let us get away with all we've done to her. We have to pay. We can try to rush to her, but eventually the door will break, the basement flooding with the Grey floating above, watching us suffer and reach oblivion. Suddenly, we're forced down into the water, and looking down, we see that our bloated remains have latched on, finally able to take hold and destroy us, like they tried to before. There's no hope, and she's taken away, along with everything else. Seeing her again with the shifting mound brings some more clarity to this path. Caught in a cycle of killing, one eventually broken by her. It's a cycle that saw an end, but without change, there are no endings. All endings are new beginnings, and through new beginnings, great things can bloom forth. If we claim that we deserve what she did to us, we're assured that this is wrong. People don't inherently deserve the bad things that happen to them, even though it can feel like that sometimes. The idea of karma is prevalent in our society, but that's all it is, an idea. The world itself is not trying to tear you down because you deserve it. Bad things just can happen. They do happen. But we can't let ourselves believe that we're without agency as a result of that. In a way, this is similar to what we learned through the Wraith. There's always a way. Even when we're surrounded by cruelty, there's always a way to escape things, something to break the cycle. To break free of the cycle and see the new beginning arise. There will always be something. Of course, it's also worth talking about the Grey's reflection, by which I mean a path encountered through the damsel, where instead of freeing her, or letting her true nature fade into the forefront of our minds, we take the blade from the start and find a chance to slay her. Rushing towards her, she shows concern, but no agency for her own survival. She just wants to make us happy, and evidently, killing her must make us happy. She puts up no fight, no concern at all, and peacefully passes. But someone has other thoughts. The smitten is struck by grief, watching his beloved die by what are technically his own hands. He has no desire to get over this, grabbing the blade from the damsel's corpse and pointing it directly towards us. I don't like him. He ends us, the pain of losing his beloved sending us down to the floor, to die alongside the damsel, who died with a smile on her face. As things fade, we're ready to meet with... Again? The Grey again? The landscape is just the same, but dry, free from the constant downpour we once experienced here, though we are met with the cold again. The internal conflict going on between our voices is complex. Clearly they're at odds, but they believe that the princess must still be around. And considering our last romp here, they're right, she must be. We make our way back to the cabin, meeting the same sight we saw before, but completely dry, lifeless, undecayed, with a white figure against the far wall. Once again, we're in complete contrast to what we saw here last time. Ignoring the mirror, we approach the door once again, hoping to find the blade on the other side. The environment on our way down is quite the same, but dusty and dry, the Grey looking up at us, but more pained than before. Entering the basement, we see her decayed body laying against the wall, dead again, but more so than last time. But then, just like last time, we hear the door slam, and look up to see her, staring back down at us with a blade in her chest, but now wielding a torch in her hand. It appears that a flood is not her goal this time.
You came back. I missed you.
When she eventually speaks to us, she sounds caring, like we haven't totally changed who she is as a person, if you can even still call her a person. She brings us insight, claiming that it's this world itself that has turned us against each other, and that we should be together. Knowing the truth of this realm, we know that she's right. We were once together, but because of this narrator and this construct, we're forced to hurt each other over and over. It's a place that breeds turmoil for us both, when we're really meant to be one. She throws the torch down, intent on destroying this place as best she can. We try everything we can to escape, but with the fire roaring behind us and the door keeping us down here, it's pointless. Smoke enters our lungs, and talking is doing nothing to prevent what is already set in motion. Our body begins to singe, and the Grey comes alongside us. We're destined to die together as one. As the flames roar on, we feel complete pain as our body is ruined in the inferno, as is hers. Forced to stare into what's left of her as everything burns, until things start to fade. She becomes little more than a singed memory, veiled in white, before being taken. Despite the terror of living through this, the smitten got his way, and it was kind of romantic. Even with our betrayal, she cared for us. She wanted us to have harmony, even if it meant taking away everything. She wanted to destroy what turned us into monsters, and she was right to. Her monologue in the end is quite similar to the previous Greys, so there's not much I can add here about the nature of change. But how this ends with us together, it reinforces in my mind that our true nature, both of ours, is to be together. Apart, we are two halves in a constant dance of hatred and betrayal, but together we're one, and none of that other stuff matters anymore. We're better together. The world is better with the two together. Life and death, stasis and transformation, we need both. This chapter alone is a strong part of why I really feel this to be the case. It's hauntingly beautiful in the way it brings them together. Now, while we've discovered a fair amount of vessels just from exhausting our options and routes we've seen before, that doesn't mean that there aren't more options for us to discover in our initial meeting with the princess. For instance, by going down without the blade and witnessing her try to bite her own arm off, we see the knife mysteriously reappear, and we immediately grab it and plunge it into her back. But that doesn't kill her. She has more fight within her, backing away but staring at us ferociously. We've angered her, and without warning, she pounces back at us despite her wounds, tearing at us desperately, until we eventually manage to throw her off of us. But it's not worth the fight. We collapse to the ground, her staring back at us from a dark corner of the room, waiting. She thought we could save her, but we immediately betrayed her, this bringing out an animalistic side of her in a fit for survival. It's quite fitting that what we meet next is accompanied by the hunted. Yeah, duh. We head towards the cabin, praying for a better outcome this time, knowing that we shouldn't trust her. The cabin feels quite similar, though warped. There just isn't much to remark upon. Down the dilapidated staircase, it feels like we're entering a jungle, with the princess speaking up with a feeling of virality.
I can smell you.
Entering the main area, we can see her tail. Her her tail, only just illuminated before she fades fully into the darkness. She stares at us from a distance, it being obvious just how much more power she holds over us. She's clearly much bigger, and it's not hard to assume she's more agile, can see us through the darkness, and can sense our fear. The hunted warns us that she's imminent, and we have to move. And now, the pressure is on, because each choice here could easily be our last. While we avoid her for some time, most of our choices will lead to the same fate. She lunges towards us, her eyes filled with malice and desire. Things are hopeless in her world, and we get devoured. And this right here is the only thing in this game to truly repulse me. There's fear, there's deep horror, there's reaction. All of the moments of heavy gore in this game felt like nothing to me compared to...
I guess that's it then, isn't it? Unfortunately for you, no. This isn't it.
this. Being in the belly of the beast. The scarily vivid nature of this scene, us being stuck inside her, acid pooling around us, threatening what is left of our lives as we hear the princess move on the outside. I truly felt sick when witnessing the scene for the first time, and even now I still feel the same. I have to give the creators props for setting up something that evoked such a visceral reaction from me. Even now, we're still on a time crunch, threatened by the nature of our captor's body, which will surely cause our demise given enough time. I'm legitimately shaking a little bit. I don't like thinking about this part. The beast painfully goes over the details of what she experienced as she passed. Her attempts to use her body to escape the cabin to no avail. She breaks free from her chains, and we can hear the sounds of her movement, her legs thumping up the staircase, ready to escape, now that she is, in a way, one with us. We've stepped into a world like the one we see in the end, one where she holds the power, and we're a victim to it, interpreted through the language of predator and prey as opposed to the forces that we truly are. Trying to reason with her for long enough will cause her stomach acid to eat away at us, our flesh dissolving, every cell in our body doing everything to resist, but eventually fading. No matter how strong our will is, we die in a slow and agonizing way, and I really don't want to face that reality. Only when we express the desire to be free is the barrier broken, enough to let her escape from the cabin, with us still within, until everything changes. We're expelled from her, forced to face a world that has become nothing except the two of you, both damaged after the terror you've just faced in different ways. Like always, she's taken away and we can meet her in the long quiet. She's fueled by instinct and wants to be one with us. It's unsurprising that her true instincts start to show as her humanity fades away. And this desire to be whole again is one we keep running into, because these two are meant to be together. I know I keep saying this, but it's true. To talk about the nature of this route, we need to see the shifting mound again. She ponders whether fear or compassion is what drove us to help her, as opposed to trying to fight her from the inside. But the fact is, no matter which is true, it led to the best outcome. She escaped from her prison, and you escaped from yours. Sometimes it's the outcome of an event that matters more than your intentions. The idea of intentions is interesting. When you're hurt by what someone did, does it really matter if they were trying to do something nice? While I feel the answer can be yes, I know that everything in the world is complex. You can want to help someone and end up hurting them, but your desire to be nice doesn't negate the fact that they were hurt. The opposite is also true. You can help someone by trying to hurt them, though this can be more rare. When I felt hurt by the world, I tried to look towards the intentions of those who had hurt me, wanting to believe that they weren't trying to make things worse for me. But no matter how true that was, I was still broken. Striking the balance of focusing on the reasons behind actions and also the effects of them, whether they're things that we have done or others have done, is something that can bring about more positive change if taken to heart. That's how I see things, at least. But now let's go back, down to the dense underground jungle. Through evading her, we get grazed by her attacks. We don't know how to fully escape her wrath, but we know that each blow will be worse than the last, eventually destroying us. Exhaustion starts to set in, but somehow we're able to avoid being devoured, diving out of the way, but not fully. She managed to divide us, consuming our lower body, leaving our torso and head outside, organs laid out across the floor as we start to fade away. Yet all the beast cares about is the fact that we'll die before we're devoured. Even when she's lost a part of her humanity, she still has a clear idea of how this construct works in keeping her contained. Darkness settles in around us, and now it's time to experience Now in a deeply overgrown woods, the skeptic has come back to us, ready to argue against the instincts that ended in our death. The atmosphere here is ruinous. We know that she must have become more monstrous in this new step in the cycle, and this whole world is essentially just her domain. The skeptic comes up with a plan to try and coax her out of the basement, into the main room, where we can fight on more even ground. But there's no guarantee of success. Ignoring the mirror, we take our pristine blade, stuck in a tree stump like the sword of Excalibur, and head towards the opening. The entrance takes the form of a tunnel, getting more cramped the further into it we go. A dark and desolate space, accompanied by silence. She's usually only silent when she's dead, but now she's hunting. Darkness is our enemy, and it's everywhere. We know she must be looking right at us. All we can do is hope. We can step into the shadows, prepared to fight her, awaiting the inevitable, before she lunges out of nowhere, running at us with a sense of fervor, fully intent on doing what she wanted to as the beast. But then, things begin to fade. Despite staying in the cabin and not being faced with purely death, we're being brought to that familiar place. She stops in her tracks, looking at us with bewilderment, a stare that asks more questions than we can answer, before she's taken with us. That, of course, is not all. We can still go back to enact the skeptic's plan, walking back into the basement, trying to stay strong. We wait until we hear movement to lure her back out. On cue, we rush to the opening to make our escape, her hot on our heels. We make our way up, barely escaping her grasp as we clamber through the darkness, only to look back at her when the sounds start to subside. This beast, this monster, caught in the only way out from her den, unable to help herself, feeling a sense of fear that one does not typically see in a predator. She isn't something to fear anymore. She can't hurt us. She's scared, feeling the same fear we felt looking at her. And while there is catharsis in this, deep down we know that she too is in pain, trapped in the same construct, still a victim in her own way. We can try to talk to her, but approaching her doesn't lead to any surprise twist or heartfelt conversation. She's defeated, as nothing is starting to set in around us both, taking her away. Now, despite this being an add-on to the beast and expanding in a fairly similar direction, the message I get here is quite different, and it comes from the fact that she was a victim in the end. Fears, as discussed before, can cripple our motivation, send us away from the best parts of life. We feared her, and when we finally faced our fears, we saw her get taken away, our reward for being brave in the face of pure terror. In the same way, we tried to lure her out into the open so we could take her down, and instead we were able to see just how helpless she could be. This horrific beast's impact diminished into one worth feeling sorry for. When we face our fears, instead of letting them rule us, not only can we see the positives of life instead of missing the shots we don't take, but sometimes we can see that the things we feared themselves aren't nearly as overwhelming as we thought. Before we move on, it's worth mentioning that after this video was recorded, but before its release, a new update to Slay the Princess has dropped, called the Pristine Cut. I mention this because the Den is one of 3 chapters that have received a lot of new content in this update, and while I don't exactly know what this will entail as of recording, it will be interesting to see what changes are made to this vessel's story. Heading back to our initial meeting with the princess, we can approach her with the blade and listen to her warnings, but then the narrator says she's unarmed. But even though the idea of her being armed was something I had never considered, now I'm considering it. This is a narrator, he can't be certain of everything, right? We can ask if he's sure, but through that, we've hesitated. That hesitation shows fear of her, and when we end up rushing towards her, she manages to produce a blade of her own out of nowhere, stabbing us in the back before we can kill her. We can make sure to stab her back before we die, but it's too late. She's never done this before, and clearly she only could because we assumed it was possible. That possibility became a certainty, which led us down the path of... With us in the familiar landscape this time is the cheated, who isn't happy about what just went down. We were lied to, and then everything went wrong. Heading up to the cabin, we see a room that's sharp, warped into a state that can barely be considered livable. Only recognizable as the same place we were before thanks to the pristine blade upon the table. As we walk down, we're surrounded by sharp wooden planks, and the tense background music spelling out for us that doom lies ahead. This place is right out of a horror movie, and within this basement is our slasher villain, speaking to us in a distorted tone.
Finally, somebody! Quick, get me out of these chains. We're not safe here.
Everything about her physical form is sharp, jagged, her voice, her demeanor. Could there be a worse omen out there? We already believe that she can stab us again, so pretending like that isn't a certainty now that we're faced with her is pointless. The narrator feels like more of a detriment this time around, ignoring our pleas entirely. Even when the princess spells out exactly what happened last time, he's useless. But she shows us her empty hands, her empty sleeves. Is there still a chance that she won't stab us? Eventually, whether we approach her or simply bore her with our questions actions, it will end. We get close enough to be stabbed, or she escapes her chains as a result of a blade erupting from her body. She wasn't just concealing a weapon out of sight, she is the weapon. The razor's edge of language that differentiates this situation from the last. We're screwed. She rushes towards us, and the obvious happens. Our tiny blade compared to hers is nothing.
I'm going to kill you now.
Unfortunately, she's hilarious. Unlike every previous second chapter we've encountered, there was no way to escape this fate. And we move on to...
You're on a path in the woods.
No, fuck that. If we're gonna have to keep doing this over and over and over again, we're not starting in that goddamn woods every time. We're starting in the fucking cabin.
You're what? The interior of the cabin is sharp.
Now, the chapter diverges here, depending on whether we brought the blade down with us last time. Taking it takes us to arms race, but leaving it takes us to no way out, where this contrarian sees the knife again, and immediately throws it out the window. Great. Other than this change, these chapters progress in the same way, us moving down into the basement, moving past the mirror in this jagged cabin? Calling it a cabin now feels weirdly incorrect. As we approach the stairway, we fall forward, each step gone, replaced with a ramp that sends us straight down into her lair, with no means of escape. She wastes no time in lording over us, making it clear that she can't be beaten, like she gets a sick joy out of being able to kill us repeatedly. Blades are up from her arms again, and she approaches. We get a list of options, none of which feel smart, and we get to try them all, since no matter what we choose, she rushes towards us, our choice not working, another voice coming into play. We get skewered and skewered again. It's hard to tell if we've even truly died at this point, each timeline feeling way too connected to the previous. We haven't faded, but more voices are coming in from our torment, each of them trying their own ideas, while she stares at us with the same contorted grin, turning more and more into blades. With each voice we should get stronger, but it's just a montage of failed ideas splitting us further and further into pieces. Finally, once our mind is exhausted of ideas, flooded with the different parts of ourselves, we die. Like the previous time, we skip straight to the cabin and experience something similar on both sides. Make our way down, meeting her once again, hoping that our depth of experience will take us as far as we need to go. She's there, waiting for us, surrounded by jagged edges, like the ones we know must make up her whole body by now. Barely holding ourselves together, she taunts us with the idea of something new, and in an instant, she transforms.
All that remains in the center of the room is a skeleton of blades.
Fuck, she's knives. The voices all speak up in a cacophony of protest and, in some cases, adoration. But as they all start to overlap, the only thing we can do is empty our mind. Doing this sends us back to the basement we once knew, and erasing the narrator takes us out to the void, alone with her, free from anyone telling us what to do. No voices at play, simply just flowing with the vibes of the emptiness around us. If we took the blade, then we end up in a poetic dance with her, our bodies simply avoiding her every move, our weapons clashing, over and over, until eventually it's possible to strike, and she fades. If we didn't take the knife, it's different. Clearing our mind changes us, and despite all of her effort, none of her blows land, all phasing through the concept of us. We don't exist here, not in a way that she can affect. We are nothing, incapable of true change, and she cannot force that change upon us. In the end, she gets destroyed. Her heart taken into the void, she's gone once again. Now, I understand that this interpretation is very on the nose, but sometimes the most obvious things can be reassuring. We saw that nothing was going right for us in the end. We were being torn apart, thinking that leaning into these voices and taking the pain would make us stronger, but it absolutely didn't. It just kept making things worse, breaking us into more and more pieces. But what did save us? Well, it was ignoring all of those voices. Ignoring the thoughts surrounding us that made it seem like the way out was to withstand more pain. These voices helped us to get torn apart, and we only became whole again when we cast them aside, only focusing on being us. I don't think I need to elaborate on this. It's a very strong message, even if it is a little more simple. Now if you can, cast your mind back to the adversary, and her drive to fight us forever. We have fought her before and won, but there's ample room for us to lose. Dancing around, trying to damage her without truly aiming for her death, it bores her, and just as easily as the fight began, she makes sure it ends, taking full control of us and crushing us in an instant. The threat of losing this fight was constant, as we have to truly understand her in order to keep her satisfied as the adversary. Any wrong move could have led to our demise. A demise that sends us ahead into Surrounded by the tough edges of a valley, we emerge onto the path towards the cabin, this time accompanied by the hunted as well. The voices within us argue and try to understand the situation, like always, but we move on, trying to come up with any idea of what to do. As we enter the cabin, we find that it's not just surrounded by stone walls that push against us, but ones that constrict us, barely leaving us any room to move ahead, which is the only thing that we should be doing regardless. The hunted remains certain that we need to lead her into the open. There won't be enough room to beat her in here, while the stubborn just wants the blade. Ignoring the mirror, we see the pathway down to meet her once again. Instead of a standard staircase, we're met with what is essentially a cliff, forced to climb down slowly, being aware of the footholds on the way down in order to reach her. Things are still tight, and tension is high. She's aware that we're approaching her, and she's fully intent on getting more out of us. Eventually, we reach the bottom, and stare into the narrow tunnel ahead, only to lock eyes with her. Bigger and angrier than she was last time, her goals haven't changed one bit. She still craves the endless battle that only we can provide her with. This is a situation of extreme pressure. One slip and we're doomed again, like threading through the eye of a needle. Yeah, I know. She begins to chase us down, but we rush up, using our knowledge of the footholds from climbing down, while the princess forces the wall to make way for her, furiously ascending just behind us. She's not letting us go without a fight. In a final burst of energy, we make our way out of the cabin entirely, now in a place where we can fight, and maybe even win. Not even a second later, she escapes from the cabin herself. Holy shit, she's huge. Now the fight can truly begin. Waiting has brought her anger as far up as it can go. She won't hold anything back, so we can't either. She charges at us, fully intent on ending us in one fell strike, but we swerve, striking back at her. You trade blows, and she feels ecstasy. She desires nothing less than the thrill of the fight, caught in yet another dance of violence against one another. Beauty evoked through your tenacity. You're both fully destroying each other, barely hanging on as the world around you fades again. Your rival is taken away, deemed ready to leave thanks to your actions. You may be wondering what I can even say here, but when we see her again with the shifting mound, she says all we need to hear.
We made each other better. To have no challenges to fade into nothing. A life without obstacles is no life at all.
She's right. A life without challenges sounds freeing and worthwhile, but a life where we can't face any challenges at all, that's damning. I feel that there's less purpose to our actions when we don't have the knowledge of the challenges we faced in the past and will face in the future. Looking back to our pasts, we might find events that hurt us, ones that still have an effect now. But managing these moments, overcoming them, and knowing that we can become more than we were before, that's a part of life that brings out beauty within us and can push us to be a better version of ourselves. We can keep fighting, even if we know that there's much more to fight against. While there is more we can find through the adversary, there's someone I'd like to meet first. Returning to our first meeting with the princess, we bring the blade with us and sit down to try and talk with her again. Like with the prisoner, there's a lot we can say to her, including letting her know that we've heard that she'll destroy the world. While this choice isn't a requirement for what we're about to reach, choosing this option made this future a lot more impactful. Despite her arguments, we can still choose to ignore her pleas, following the narrator's words, but our prior hesitation leads to us being knocked down again. In the past, we've ended her, or fled from her as we reach this moment. But we can give up, see that we won't win this battle, knowing that we're dead no matter what. She looms over us, covered in blood, both hers and yours, standing still rigidly. With us broken, down on the ground, she's able to finish us off, leaning directly onto our throat, crushing us with a level of power that she should be incapable of, and predictably, we die. At this point, it feels pertinent to mention that this was the second ever path I went down in this game, so even just seeing that there was more after death was still confusing to me. Furthermore, being met by the title of The Tower leaves an impact. My mind was first brought to tarot cards, where the tower is associated with danger, crisis, and destruction, so clearly I thought that this chapter would be nothing but smooth sailing. This time we're joined by the Broken, who has no faith in our abilities, the life of the party. We enter the cabin, met with the atmosphere of a grand chapel, the blade perched upon a marble pillar, only able to be reached if we climb the nearby ladder. This is the biggest this room has ever felt. Many times it has felt cramped and desolate, and now it feels imposing. It's enormous, threatening, making us feel small, just as small as the Broken feels. As we head downwards, we find that the steps are abnormally huge, just the same as everything else. A sweet smell wafts up from below, the Broken shifting from gloom to a more accepting nature in an instant. She calls up to us from below.
Is that a guest I hear? Don't linger on the stairs. Come down and witness me.
And it was at this point that I suddenly realized why this chapter must be called The Tower. Her voice booming out with an unfiltered aura of dominance? There's really only one option for what she must have become. She hovers dauntingly at the other end of the room, lit from behind by a massive stained glass window. Her dress and hair gently flowing, and the shackle around her arm appearing as if it must be purely for show. Have I forgotten anything? Oh yeah, she's gigantic! We are no longer witnessing a princess. Instead, she can best be described as a god. Not the one that we know the Shifting Mound to be, but a different one of her own making. She taunts us, fully believing that we are incapable of affecting any part of her, before commanding us to drop the blade. And then...
Kneel. Oh, are you still trying to defy me? I said kneel.
Shut up. Since we told her that she was destined to end the world, she divulges that this thought spun itself into her mind and awakened her in a sense, driving her to become this. While I explain that she is different to the Shifting Mound, we see the same principles within her, though they are spurred from malice rather than from a vision of infinite possibility. Despite her newfound power, she still needs our help to break free from it all, to set forth her destruction in the way that best befits her status. She wants us to be by her side. The Broken has no hope in us stopping her, feeling the desire to enter full subservience to the goddess. It's easier than feeling pain after all. Talking to her makes it incredibly clear just how much the power has gotten to her head. She speaks of her divine truth, of us being little more than a pet to her. She speaks of many truths that we can't turn to lies. Eventually, it's too much, and we choose to fully submit to her. Her magnificence brings us to her side, ready to free her from her chains, but the narrator, still persistent, protests. However, for the first time when she stands outside of our brain, she senses the narrator trying to stand in our way, an echo who doesn't belong with us. He's not a true part of us. The narrator is shocked. She shouldn't be able to sense him. But she's a fucking goddess! Of course she can do that too! She mocks the narrator before...
I don't care what you are. You're mine. Rise, my little bird.
Without hesitation, you're brought to your feet.
Taking full control of him, her words being spoken through her body and the voice of the narrator simultaneously. She's turned him into a vessel for her will, and now there's nothing left in her way. With a simple thought, we break her chains, freeing her, and signaling the end. As we see oblivion start to come into frame, we reach out to her hand, and uncountably more hands take her away, and it all fades. I don't think it should come as a surprise that I love this chapter. Not just for what we just experienced, but for what will spin off of it. This game leading towards the battle between opposing gods that originally governed the cycle of the universe is already a concept I adore with every part of my soul. And then we see this version of her. It's almost like seeing a precursor to what she will become. Like seeing the Shifting Mound break out. She's a being that believes she is everything, and she's right. Steadfast in her desires, but brought about by feeling the thrill of torment. Even taking over the one who trapped us in this construct in the first place as a final show of dominance. It's amazing just by itself, but through the context of the game around it, there's true majesty at work here. When we see her again with the Shifting Mound, she reiterates that we made the right choice, proclaiming that both of us working together are needed to create a future worth looking towards. I spoke about the idea of hope, even amongst hopelessness earlier with the moment of clarity, but here it takes on a slightly different spin. The idea of hope being able to push us into something greater, instead of just pulling us away in our darkest moments. With hope, there are things to look forward to, reason to look ahead at what's to come without feeling the threat of oblivion. And while it can feel hard to experience that hope and see a better path, it's constant, an opportunity to push ourselves higher. Now if we briefly go back to the adversary, if we choose to ignore the blade on the way down, she'll be furious, getting even more so if we try to reason with her. Whether we end up fleeing or trying to pacify her, she'll destroy us, and we end up, well, I'll get to it in a moment. Because it's a world we can also reach from the tower. If, from the moment we meet her, we speak with defiance, going against the wills of a god, she'll eventually command us to pick up our blade, and we can't stop ourselves from following her command. She tells us to stand, and still we get no choice, her staring at us in anticipation. As punishment for our insolence, she commands us to end our life.
What?
But our defiance pays off, as we can will ourselves to power through and try to slay her. Every step is a mountain, the goddess commanding us to stab our lungs, but we power on despite everything, intent on ending her. We're dangerously wounded, but we can't let her win this time. No matter how futile it is, we approach her, and she commands us to stop, towering over our lacerated body with a sense of calm, gently raising her head with her finger. She can tell that we're different and tempts us once more to join her by her side. Despite the pain, we ignore her, rushing away before she has a chance to stop us, and delivering a brutal strike against her ankle, sending her crashing down from her pedestal of divinity. Before she can even react, we manage to drive the blade right into her chest. We've gone from plaything to god killer in a matter of moments. She looks upon her wounds with a twisted mix of emotions. The first time her air of opulence has been shattered. She's incredulous, terrified by her actions, by us even daring to overpower her, and she breaks into fury, knocking us aside before violently striking us with her fist, destroying us and the ground below. Barely conscious as we watch her crumble, she no longer feels like the god she was. She's something different, less divine. We've managed to change her once more, to kill the god that she was. But what happens now?
You're on a path in the woods. And at the end of the path, okay, what the hell is that?
We awaken to the sound of the broken sobbing, distraught over the loss of the object of his desire. The stubborn is with us now, and yes, I need to talk about the landscape. It's a mess of flesh and rot that barely even resembles the woods anymore. We approach the cabin, knowing that we need to destroy her, because she won't hesitate to destroy us. We see the remains of her elegance, ruined by disgusting living meat infesting every crevice of this place, an overwhelmingly large mirror blocking the way forward, like always. Moving past it, we step into the disgusting darkness, met by the fury of a princess pushed much too far. Unlike the tower, she's filled with rage, and unlike the adversary, she hates us. She wants us gone for good. Face to face with her, she's a monster, and the scent of her beating, exposed heart is too much to bear. She spots us and forgoes pleasantries, taking a booming step forward and tearing the skin from her arm to free her from her chains. She has no obstacles here. There's nothing that can stand in the way of her anger. At this point, it's time to take action. You would think. There's no room to explore, and no matter which option we choose, we're eviscerated in an instant. Her presence was enough to tear us to shreds. She seems victorious, and then everything fades. It's an anticlimax, yes, completely unfair, but we knew that there was no chance of stopping her. This was inevitable. This feels like a good time to mention that The Fury is another chapter that will have seen significant changes in the update, which means by the time you're seeing this, the world in which The Fury simply destroys us has passed. And while it's unclear what the new version of this chapter will hold, it seems like there's a good chance that we'll end up standing against her. As a result of this, my idea of how she reflects change comes entirely from our standoff with the tower. Sometimes things can feel like a complete certainty, there's no other outcome. But with tenacity and the desire to stay away from what we know, we can get the power to escape from what must feel like the weight of a god holding us back. Even when things take a turn from the worst, we can turn them back in our favor. Going back to the tower again, we have another choice, and it's one we've nearly taken already. When she commands us to end our life, instead of trying to rise up against her, we submit. If we didn't defy her enough prior, we don't even get a choice in this action, though the narrator tried to resist. She tells us how pointless resisting her is. We're an ant compared to her godhood, and the narrator is once again barely an obstacle in her way. She once again takes over him, allowing her to finish us off, and we die. The terror of the echo in our mind being taken over once again, but this time bringing our destruction instead of salvation, we have more reason to fear her with what follows. Apotheosis, deification, the elevation to the status of a god. While it may seem like she had reached this level before, clearly she can go further. Apotheosis is a term I was unfamiliar with before this point, but it really is the perfect word for what we're experiencing here. We stand in the path in the woods, except it's warped in a way we haven't seen before. We can see the cabin perched atop the hill, straight ahead of us, and the only way is up, to ascend like she did. The trees resemble ornate marble columns. The ground looks rocky and rough. More than ever before, it feels like we're in her world. The paranoid joins us, hoping to keep the broken in check, and we discuss our predicament with the narrator. He explicitly talks about how we were the ones to give her as much power as she has now, the broken taking this to heart, reveling in the idea that he helped create a new god. With barely a moment to think, we can try and head towards the cabin, only to feel the ground quake and crumble beneath us. The trees start to bend towards the cabin. It's the center of everything after all. The ground shifts and we're dragged towards it like everything else. Taking a step towards the cabin, everything on our side explodes out. Our bodies slammed against a tree and forced to witness the destruction of the only thing in this construct we truly know. From the desolation, a figure rises high into the sky, finally broken out of her shackles, looming higher above us than we could imagine, with radiance never before seen. She is everything, and everything else is nothing. The gravity of her opulence is too much to bear. Everything drawn towards towards her like a black hole. She looks down at us with satisfaction, knowing that she's unbeatable, reaching a certain end to her ascension, with us merely a witness.
This is always how it was going to end. And this is always how it was going to begin.
The pristine blade appears next to us, and no matter whether we take her or not, we're whisked up into her orbit to join her or destroy her. As she stares up at us, illuminated from behind no matter where she looks, her bright eyes symbolizing the power she holds, things start to fade, and she's taken away. Things ended just as easily as they started. Like with the Fury, the Apotheosis will have received new content with this update. And if it wasn't obvious, I'm incredibly excited to see how this path ends up. We see her in a state of divinity, like she is as the Shifting Mound. Though this god was once human, ascending to this level from a fear snowballing as she held power over us. The two are fundamentally different as a result. The Shifting Mound has only ever known herself to be the goddess that she is, while the Apotheosis has experienced her own rise up. A different perspective, one that I can't wait to see drawn upon in whichever way they choose to take it. Is it obvious that I have a strong love of mythology yet? When we encounter her in the end, she speaks about struggles being the thing that brings meaning into our lives. And while I don't really see myself fully agreeing with that, it's a perspective that I see validity in. Like I've said previously, a life without struggles means a life without the best of times. And not just in the nature of dichotomy, struggles can be the thing that motivates us to change. To stray away from monotony and become something greater than what we were. They can be motivating, even if they don't feel like it. Despite the climactic heights that we've just reached, there is plenty more to discuss. A princess whose thematic nature brings out what I believe to be two of the most beautiful moments in this entire game. From the beginning, we go in without the blade, free her, but agree to try and slay her when the narrator forces our hand. She doesn't take kindly to this betrayal, she trusted us. She fights back, but unfortunately, her veracity is too much for us. We die with her staring at our body, watching us perish with pain in our eyes. And with that, it's time to meet... Back at it again in The Woods, we're joined by the Opportunist, someone we haven't seen very much of. He, unlike us, is fairly intent on killing the princess, looking for an opening and believing that there's a way. We enter the cabin, seeing it's dense with tree roots, like it's one with nature itself. This is a chapter of many options, so I won't get close to talking about every single choice we can make. But let's consider not taking the blade. The basement below is darker and gloomier than most we've become familiar with, feeling natural in a way that is disturbing, as if nature simply allowed this place to exist, rather than humanity bringing it to existence.
Her voice skitters up from below.
Something nasty finds itself on my stairs.
The princess speaks to us mischievously, already not trusting us as a result of what we did before. Reaching her, we see her huddled in the corner, still believing our intentions are to hurt her, and to be fair, they are. Not specifically ours, but with the narrator and the Opportunist clouding our thoughts, the desire to kill is ever present, and it's almost like she can sense that. Talking to her, it becomes clear that you two can't see eye to eye. It seems like we plotted her demise, even when we know we didn't. There are no reasons for her to believe our intentions are good now. She seems to cautiously accept the idea of working together, to let her out of the cabin. She lets herself free from the chains. She had just made us think that she was tied up, leaving the element of surprise in her court. Both of you are conniving and trying to win. Things don't have to be this way though. If we let her out, we can trust her, and she can trust us. But there's the problem. This chapter is about trust, how betrayal can affect you. You get burned once, and it feels like you're bound to be burned again. How does one rebuild trust? When you don't trust someone, you have the fear that they're going to hurt you again. Paranoia about whether they have your best interests in mind, and sometimes paranoia about if anyone does. It's a difficult process, one that takes time and effort from both sides. The person who broke it needs to show that they have improved, and the person scorned needs to have room to believe them. And speaking from experience, that can be hard. While people can improve and become better, it's hard to read their soul and know that it's not an act. And when you're in those darkest places, sometimes it won't even matter what's said at all. The knowledge that someone has the capacity to hurt you is sometimes more than enough to let you grow distant. We see the results of this as this chapter moves on. She tried to follow us up the stairs, but the Opportunist protests. Trying to make the reverse happen doesn't go smoothly either. She can't believe that our intentions are pure unless we're upstairs. Fighting back enough, she'll try to trust you, more cautious than ever. Standing behind her, she still isn't certain, and the Opportunist looks towards the blade. And as soon as the witch realizes that it was an option, she locks us downstairs forever. Standing in front of her, things feel okay at first, but out of nowhere the witch grabs hold and pulls us both back down, falling and bruising our bodies in the process. She broke our trust back, and now we're both worse off. No matter which way we go, things eventually fade, the two of us never mending our issues. There was no way for us to make it upstairs without falling falling back into disarray. We're both just too untrusting of the other. What we see through this vessel is turmoil coming through stasis. Both you and the witch stuck in a state where you can't believe in each other. No real power to take change into your own hands. We're worse for each other, dragging ourselves down in our hatred for our opposition. This is what we would see in a world without transformation. A world where we can't better ourselves, where things can't improve. And that's a terrifying state to imagine. This is probably the closest we get to seeing an actively unchanging world. We suffer because of this, and we don't deserve to suffer. We deserve to grow and flourish as people. We deserve to transform. Now, with the concept of trust at play, let's look at a different outcome. What if we could rebuild trust with her? Going back, we take the blade down with us and cautiously approach the basement, the blade held behind our back, trying not to alert her to its presence. Unfortunately for us, she immediately surmises its position, foiling the element of surprise. Like I said, we're in a world without trust. It just makes sense for her to assume that our intentions are as sinister as our first meeting. So how do we remedy this? We can try to reason with her or apologize, but it doesn't make any clear difference. There's only one thing we can try here, to give her the blade. Willing to give up our only weapon to show her that we have no intention of hurting her, that we believe in her. Not only is it a way of showing that she should have faith in us, it should tell her that we have faith in her, despite what the voices say. We toss her the blade and she looks it over. All we can do is stay pure and believe that she won't turn it on us.
What? What do you mean by that? What kind of game are you playing?
The look of surprise that momentarily softened her features vanishes as she steels her nerves. And then she buries the blade in your heart.
Never mind. She looks over our body with a sense of joy, seeing that she's won, until she questions it. There was no good reason for us to do that, yet we did. We lost everything and gave it to her. We had nothing to gain. As things fade to black, we can see the fear and regret in her eyes. And it's enough to transform her into...
You're on a path in the woods. I can't believe she actually stabbed us.
We see a dark and gloomy woods, dying trees and little vegetation otherwise. Like always, the voices discuss, and we're joined by the smitten. Yay? The hero questions whether she'll see that things don't have to end in violence this time, but it's uncertain. The cabin looks slightly thorny and overgrown from the outside, and the interior, it's nearly entirely open to the elements, layered with red roses. It's a cabin that has been broken down, and yet life is still seen within it, in a way just like her. The blade is missing, and presumably she still has it somewhere with her. We descend into the basement through the empty doorframe, down a staircase that's clearly dealt with the flames of torment, recently extinguished, making way for thorns to grow from the walls. A spiky exterior there to dissuade us from causing further pain. The language of metaphor permeates throughout this chapter, so yes, I'm gonna focus on it. As she calls out to us, she sounds dismayed.
I don't know why you let me do that. I don't know what you want from me.
She doesn't understand us. We've shown her two different sides of ourselves, and now she isn't sure what to believe. As we meet her in the densely covered cabin, she clutches the knife close to her chest, like she's still trying to decipher meaning from it, looking over at us with concern. Instead of her showing distrust through being our better, now she's showing it through weakness. And in a way, it feels like we're on equal footing for the first time. While we can try leaving her behind, quickly letting the world fade without closure, we shouldn't. We can offer to free her, because at this point, isn't that what she deserves? To be free from the pain of not being sure whether to trust the only person she's ever known? She wants to have faith in us, but she can't see our intentions being pure. This is the princess at her most dejected, caught between trusting us and getting hurt again, or staying away, wallowing in her sorrow. All we can do is show her compassion, gently reaching for the blade, letting her feel that we have no malice left in our heart. Before taking it out of her grasp, she asked whether her choice to believe was correct. And, look, this is a chapter that weighs heavily on my mind. It feels the most real out of any single part in this game's experience. It hits me in a very deep way because I know I've been in her situation, looking at people and wondering if I can ever trust them again, or even if I should have in the first place. So it's difficult to even consider hurting her after everything we've done to build her back up. We cut her free, severing the vines that bound her arms. Though she still flinches in fear, still worried that you may not stick to your word, she falls against our body, smiling at us gently, seeing that we do care about her. The smitten goads us into kissing her, and we can, in a beautiful moment of passion that frustrates the narrator to no end. But no matter what, the two of you return to the stairs, seeing the path blocked with thorns. Though they are an obstacle, we can move past them, gently moving them out of our path to ascend ascend up the stairs again, to a better world for us both. You're both better for taking a step and trusting each other, but like always, things fade. This was one of the most moving moments in this entire game. We see something beautiful bloom from such an awful situation. And it's realistic, not perfect. It's not a sudden fix. Not everything has completely healed in an instant. She's still cut and hurt, but those wounds don't heal in a single moment. They take time, but like how we moved the vines out of our way when we were moving back up, we took a step in the right direction. We took a step in moving past the obstacles that were holding us back, and every step matters. I'd like to move ahead to how we see her in the end, because of what she says.
Your compassion is what freed us both, but compassion is a thing that must be nurtured, and you cannot nurture that which cannot change.
This line immediately brought me to tears, because she's right. Trust is something that can't be restored in an instant. It does need to be nurtured with compassion. And true compassion comes from goodwill, from being kind and graceful. You can't build trust out of nothing. You can only build it when things are capable of changing. While the thorn is beautiful for how real it all feels, this one is beautiful for how unreal it feels. While there are many ways to reach it from the beast, that's not how I originally encountered it. And it may not surprise you that I'm not very keen on going back to the route that repulsed me the most this late into the video. Instead, we meet again with the witch, holding the blade in hand, and instead of holding trust, we can attack. Clearly learning nothing from our first encounter. She hits us with pocket sand. Unfortunately, she's as sneaky as ever. She bites at our chest, we stab her in the back. We repeatedly trade blows over and over, like before. We're two beings caught in hatred, fighting as dirtily as we can. Nothing is fair in this war, both sinking lower with each strike, until we hear the wood around us start to groan, the rooted wall beginning to push in on us, sealing the basement door. We keep fighting, hoping to make any headway before the inevitable, but the roots overtake us both, restraining us, constricting against our bodies with barely any space around us to breathe. The room growing over what will soon be our remains, and then...
You pop. Everything goes dark. And you die.
However, and I only bring this up because it was my first experience, we can leave before doing anything. The roots still begin to overtake our world, the door vanishing before we can reach it, and without any way of even fighting for our life, everything closes in, constricting on us in the same way. We once again become one with the wilderness, as does she, and once again, we die, fated to become what exactly?
We are a path in the woods. We have no beginning, and we have no end. But something cold and unnatural sits watching us from just beyond our edge.
I've spoken of beauty a lot in this video so far, but this introduction right here, seeing that we have become one with the woods and everything around us, it's an elegant surrealness, one that literally made me sit back and applaud because of how striking it was. The princess speaks of the narrator, pushing against us from the outside, keeping us away from where we belong, and it's clear that she's speaking of the nature of the game itself, us trapped in the construct away from existence. Of course, the narrator immediately sees that something is wrong, but with the ethereal feel to the music behind us, reminding us of the long quiet, and the princess's calm tone, I can't help but entirely disagree with him. We're in a beautiful place, even if it did come from pain. The voices agree that this new realm of existence is nice. Together with her, in the most true way, we're linked to each other, as we were always meant to be. The cycle, the yin and yang, life itself embodied in who we are now. The narrator speaks his truth into us, telling us to slay her, separate ourselves back into two. And while she reacts to his words with a mix of rage and fear, knowing everything about this game, it makes sense. Being melded together as everything isn't the closest we get to what we used to be. The same thing that she wants us to be in the end. Why wouldn't she be incensed in the idea that we can be torn back into two? There's the idea that her hatred of us runs so deep that it can't be ignored. That who we are now doesn't matter when we look back at what we used to be. And looking into that is what separates us, unbinding us from the roots that surrounded us entirely, feeling our body escape from the realm with the conceptual, to come face to face with her, still living, one with nature in her own way. Her heart exposed. We can kill her, or show her compassion once more. Maybe we don't want to kill her, maybe we just want it to be ourselves. Despite being apart, we care for her. Of course, ignoring that feeling, being one with her, brings about one of the most beautiful things of all. We turn inward, accepting that we are two halves, fully bound back together. Together we are stronger, and together we spread our roots, desperate to find a part of the construct that we can break through. We're in a state of flux, searching endlessly despite the cycle of life and death, looking looking for a better world. The narrator tries to talk us down, but we take his fears as a bluff, moving on, certain that there must be a way out. After what must have been eons, we find a breaking point. A point that can break if we put all of our effort into it. We push against it, and gaze upon the world. A world of life and death, the one we were born from, and it's heavenly, shining into the darkness. The narrator kept us from this source of wonderment, but as soon as it's found, things fade gently into the backdrop of the long quiet. I don't know what else I can even add to this chapter, because the graceful energy of it still overwhelms me. It shows me the beauty that comes from the concepts of stasis and transformation working in tandem. And when you compare this scene to how it feels to slay the princess at the end, and bring about a new world without her, my interpretation is that what we see here feels so much more exquisite and right for the world. It's a world that feels vibrant and fulfilling, one built from love and togetherness, as opposed to the unending emptiness that comes from her not being there to see it. This is the chapter that made me truly begin to see the opinion that I would end up holding, that we need her, we need change to guide us. Now, there's only one vessel left for us to talk about, and there's a reason I've saved her until last. Not only is she one that feels entirely different with the knowledge we've gained from all these other paths, but she's one that can shape our experience in a very strong way. Most importantly of all, is that early on in this video, I said that I fell in love with this game within 30 minutes of starting it, and this route is why. She was the first vessel I met, and is still one of the most impactful for me now. Brought into a world I had never seen before, told of a princess that must be slain, I looked over the options listed out for me, and one in specific caught my eye the most. The option to turn away, and leave this quest behind before it had even begun. The narrator disagreed, but I remained uncaring, fueled by the idea of doing something kind of funny as opposed to seeing what the game wanted me to. I assumed that this would be an interaction that quickly put me back on path. And it was. Despite going the wrong way, we still ended up approaching the cabin, but given the option to refuse again, I did just that. Trekking down the same path, we end up at the cabin once more, and away we go again. I wanted to see the limits of this pathway, waiting for the game to force my hand. Testing my limits like this already had me falling in love with this game, and yet I refused to play it. Turning around again, that shaky movement was warranted. The cabin appears in the distance, as if it's following us, the backing track beginning to flicker and warp. Focusing in the distance, more cabins come into existence, their mild inescapability multiplying over and over, the construct and the princess unable to deal with the journey being turned down. With the world fractured, we're told of the world ending, and everyone dying, seemingly. With the nature of this path being dreamlike, I shrugged off the idea that things had truly ended before, so coming back in my second ever route came as a genuine surprise. I assumed that the existence of Chapter 2 only came out as a result of being contrarian. Speaking of, the contrarian joins our journey here, and with a wall blocking us from turning around. The only way is forward. As we enter the cabin, finally, we're met with a mishmash of different styles, both visually and audibly. Elements that are disjointed, flowing differently, away from each other. Nothing here is correct, it's all fractured and confused. I immediately doubted that our blade was capable of anything, or that what was awaiting us was even a princess. I inspected the mirror, like every other time, but I genuinely hadn't expected us to be anything other than a human, so the confusion of it vanishing and our talons appearing was a double whammy. Also yeah, I realize I haven't explicitly said it yet, we're like a bird. Taking the blade, we get ready to walk downstairs, opening the door to the sight of...
The door to the basement creaks open, revealing a web of branching staircases all built from unidentifiable materials.
Fuck me! Not only are we met with the void, but seemingly infinite staircases twisting and turning around like fractal curves. This place makes no sense. It's confused and distorted. It doesn't know what it wants to be. It's everything and nothing all at once. She calls up to us, even her voice sounding strange and uncertain.
Hello? Hi. What are you doing here? Are you here to kill?
We have to move on, taking one of three options. They all lead down to her, all feeling just as endless. I took the right path, hoping for some level of comfort to come through the soft and secure nature of it. And at first it seemed like this was the case, but over time we sink into the comfort, every step taking us deeper, more submerged by the softness, taking away our agency and only giving us the illusion of security now that we're trapped. Our vision eventually gets clouded, our mind beginning to fade, our sense of self vanishing. We're barely even a being, forgetting what we were working towards and why. We see some of the dichotomies that define our existence, all of which are represented throughout the various vessels, and as things almost take shape.
Are you okay?
We're suddenly face to face with her, changed on the way to the basement, finally meeting her in probably the most normal state we can. The lights suddenly come to life when we inquire about her nature. She has a sense of fear about being down here, saying that it's like she's being pulled apart.
But at least now you're not alone. And I'm not alone either. We're probably stuck down here forever, aren't we?
And she is. With each question, reality fractures further, causing another her to appear, a slightly different version too. Each answers independently, until eventually the only option is the one I went to at first. In my defense, I was confused by it. To free her, and leave her in the basement, and slay her all at once. We end with 5 princesses, all with differing goals and thoughts, and 5 different versions of us, all fighting differently. The realities clash, the princesses beginning to warp and meld together as everything collapses inwards, unable to handle all that we brought. The narrator fades, and what's left of the prince eye express confusion, unsure of who they are now, and how this even happened, and then things fade, like always. She was many things at once, and now she's gone. Like I said previously, this was my first experience with the game, so meeting her in the long quiet, seeing her speak about the nature of everything, I assumed it was just unique to this route, especially since she says this.
I am sorry that you met this vessel so early in your journey, but they will make for a rich and vibrant heart.
She only says this if the stranger is the first vessel we discover out of the 5 we can in a single playthrough. I was incredibly confused by all of this, but in awe. This game did not hold back at all in being surreal and unsettling, even within these first 30 minutes. I knew this was a game that would never leave my heart, even though I had no idea how much it would do to help me in the future. Though, there's more to this route than purely just the stranger. When the first of your 5 paths is with the stranger, the ending you see is quite different. When we're taken into our heart normally, it's described as being like the first time we met her. Well, with the stranger, the first time we met her was when reality fractured, not in the usual basement. So when we go into her heart this time, not only is the cabin fractured, but the contrarian has returned. Making our way down is easier this time, and we see her distorted body sitting there, simultaneously happy and scared and confused. She's different to the usual princess. She has more insight, since she's multiple versions of herself, like a diet version of the shifting mound in a way. She brings forth the idea that the princesses being taken away is due to them offering us all that they can. She admits that accepting our godhood might be for the best, since it can't really be ignored. She relates to us, and how the different parts of us can pull each other in different ways. Her with her multiple bodies melded together, the hero with the multiple voices in their head, and the player, possibly someone dealing with many internal conflicts. Within the stranger, we see a bit of everything, but what I see most of all is an experience that set me up to absolutely love this game. A route that made me so glad that I decided to try and see what this game had in store, and lead me towards a path that would help me change as a person, for the better. All it really took was straying from what was expected of us. Normalcy is sometimes overrated, and true wonder can come from being different. We can find our true potential even if we're seen as strange, breaking free from the chains that we didn't even realize were holding us back. And in the end, it really just means that being strange was worthwhile. So despite the fact that I said I wasn't really going to talk about the Pristine cut in this video, it had a much bigger impact on me than I expected, so I feel like I had to talk about it at least a little. This is all very off the cuff, because I didn't really feel right writing a script for this part, but I'm still sort of ruminating on all of my thoughts. So let's begin with the chapters that have changed quite a bit. The changes made to the den are pretty interesting, because it feels like a more complete story now, as opposed to just kind of ending like it did initially. And now it covers some pretty interesting themes, so it was definitely worth the update. The Fury is one that I still haven't seen in full, but from what I have seen of it, it's insane. I am not surprised that a route that largely focuses on blood, gore, and body horror got such a glow up, but even from the little that I did see, I was kind of amazed. I will surely go back to it before this video releases, but it is pretty intense, so it might be like right before. They managed to make binary numbers unnerving. I didn't think that was possible. And the apotheosis? Holy shit. It was very clear that I was the most excited for this one because of the themes that I felt like it would encapsulate, but they went so hard on this one. They greatly surpassed my expectations. They went in so many different directions and all of them were amazing. But while I am still in awe of that chapter, I really have to hand it to the new ones. I'm not at all surprised that they managed to make such amazing new chapters in this game, because even though they are continuations of different chapter 2s, they all feel extremely interesting. There is one that does dark theming so well, and yet gives you a lot to really look back and think about. Not just about the world of the game, but in a way about our own lives. There's another one that does one of my favorite things so well: perspective. I genuinely remember gasping when I realized what the chapter was doing because it was so incredible. And it's one that I felt like has some good messages to take into account in our own lives. But then of course there's my favourite. The one that seems to be a favourite for a lot of people actually. And it's not just my favourite out of the new stuff, I think it's my favourite out of everything this game does. While I don't feel comfortable spoiling what this chapter is so soon after the update, what I will say is that the chapter hit me in a way that I didn't think this game actually could. When I talked about the thorn earlier, I mentioned that there was a line that brought me to tears, and that's because it very quickly resonated with me on a deep level. But with this new one, there was a line that managed to hit me even harder than that. It was a chapter that left me a sobbing mess. And looking back at it, there was a lot of beauty in what they managed to do with it. And honestly, in a weird way, it's a chapter that kinda made me glad that I didn't release this video before the Pristine Code update, because in a way, it hit relating to things that I talked about earlier in this video. And now I feel like it would be weird not to acknowledge that in some way. Because even though I know that this chapter will affect a lot of people the same way it affected me, it kind of felt targeted. It felt like the game knew me, it knew what I was dealing with. It felt like as I was there witnessing this chapter, the game was reaching out to me, taking my hand in theirs and saying, I see you. And in some ways, it reassured me that making a video like this wasn't wrong or a bad interpretation or anything. This is a video largely based on personal experience. It's not like media analysis. And it doesn't have to be. I can talk about my own experiences. I don't need to talk about the deep themes of love throughout this game. And realistically, I probably can't. That's all I really have to say. Maybe at some point in the future, I'll go back and look at what was added in the Pristine cut. But for now, let's get to the end of the video. Now that we've seen a bit of everything, I want to quickly speak more about the game's impact on me. I spoke about the state I was in leading up to me discovering it earlier, but there's one thing I want to reiterate on. Change is scary. The capacity that things have to change embodies so many of my darkest fears. Oblivion, of course, but also the thought of losing someone close to you, whether they pass on, or they become someone you can barely even recognize, or simply them losing interest in you as a person. Even on a small scale, preparing for something and then having it ripped away from you at the last moment. It's a crippling feeling. These are emotions I've felt for decades, but it wasn't until playing this game that I felt like I had the means to explain them. This game made me feel seen, like my fears relating to everything suddenly getting worse and never improving weren't just irrational thoughts in my head. On some level, it made sense for me to have these fears, because change, as we see it in the construct, is something that can bring out what we fear the most. Change does mean that our darkest fears can be realized, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. When I spoke about the positive sides of change seen in all these different vessels, I meant it. Change can encourage us, take us to new heights. It's how we improve ourselves, our relationships, our experiences. It's how we have the purpose to avoid those awful things that we're afraid of. It's good. It just can be bad because it's bound to be both, an unavoidable constant in our universe. As often as we've seen change make things worse, but still been able to get a positive message out of it, change has made things better for the hero and the princess in the construct. We've seen a powerful message about compassion and trust. We've seen them truly thrive when they're together instead of apart. We've seen them find peace by rejecting the shackles around them. Throughout this story, we've seen them grow as beings, even if they technically weren't ever meant to be in the first place. When I felt apprehension about things changing since first playing this game, and felt complex emotions about the events prior to it, I've thought back to the lessons that this game has taught me, and they've greatly helped. I feel stronger, being able to rationalize my thoughts through the lens that this experience has afforded me. I'm incredibly thankful that I found out about this game and decided to play it, because I genuinely can't imagine where I would be without everything that it has done for me. Thank you to everyone who was involved in its creation. Thank you to the players who made it a success, forging a path where I would eventually find it one day. And, of course, thank you for watching me talk about my experience here. That is truly all I have to say. Feel free to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more from me in the future. But for now, goodbye.